It is the most talked about and written about film of the decade. Now, from the director of The Deer Hunter, United Artists presents Michael Cimino's Heaven's Gate.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Waffle Press Retrospectives Failed Blockbusters, Season 3, Episode 5. We're here to talk about Heaven's Gate. But first, I'm your host, Diego Crespo. With me today is my co-host, Matt Garingo.
That is me, and we are here to talk about what is arguably the failed blockbuster.
I think it's a failed blockbuster. It's a failed award contender. It is the Hollywood failed experiment, basically. At least the new Hollywood failed experiment.
Yeah. Well, it is the, we will get into it, but it has the reputation of being the movie that actually sank a studio.
Mm-hmm.
Which we can
We've only talked about one other movie that fit that bill.
What was the other one we talked about?
It was Titan AE. It wasn't just that movie, but it gets credit for that.
But that's a little different, where it's like that it sunk a division, right? Like, and it Don Bluth's thing, which is like, that's more independent. This is, we're talking about United Artists basically going down.
Yeah, United Artists, like maybe the artist-friendly studio at that time, like considering a studio. I mean, you know,
like a studio standing tall for 100 years and then releasing 4 superhero films that all flop horribly in a single year, and then Zaslav having to justify that.
Apologies to Blue Beetle, which I actually enjoyed and thought was pretty good.
I've seen it, so I will not sign off on that.
Yeah.
Is it good enough that you would? Here's the thing. Like, when I saw Eternals, and like I became the fucking Eternals truther on that movie.
Yeah.
I was like, I'm willing to recommend this to people who don't even like superheroes. Like, that's gonna be my litmus test, right?
Yeah.
Does Blue Beetle cross that line, or do you kind of have to be pot committed to the thing?
If you don't like superhero movies, it's not gonna move the dial on you. I think here's the thing, and like, I know people criticize this, but I don't care. I would recommend it to Mexican people.
Well, yeah, there's that. Obviously.
No, but like, I have to say this because like, there's a lot of shit where they're like, "Isn't this so great for our people?" And I'm like, I'm glad everyone else enjoyed it. I have not felt that excited about some stuff recently that other people have, and that's fine. I'm glad they have that. This one kind of hit a lot of marks for me.
That's great to hear.
Even without the superhero stuff. Although the superhero action is like very good and fun. And I did an episode on it. Go watch it with my buddy Noah, because Gene was sick, so he couldn't watch the movie. But go check it out. I have a lot of very positive feelings about the movie. Right. I was very happily surprised.
Yeah. I'll probably end up seeing that one. Just cause
yeah, and if you're worried about it, like giving money to a superhero movie right now, don't worry, it's gonna bomb.
Yeah.
Or it is bombing, which is a bummer because I like it, but it's probably a good sign for the health of the industry.
Yeah,
that those movies aren't just making overwhelming amounts of money anymore.
Yeah, it is one of those though where it's like, oh, they're finally like I felt the same way with Eternals, where I'm like, oh, Marvel's finally doing something interesting, and it's bombing. Like,
yeah, and oh, look, it's the cast with like less white people in it. Now they get to fucking shuffle these off to the side,
Yeah. Well, I mean, didn't the guy not even want to release it? Like, it was almost got the Batwoman or Batgirl treatment.
I think that was talked about. I don't know that much about that, but it was going to be an HBO Max release.
Yeah, but also that idiot was like, we're going to do the same with Aquaman, which is like crazy considering like Aquaman's probably going to bomb too. So like, I get why he's saying that, but
I think it'll bomb here. And this is all relevant because we're talking about bombs.
Yeah.
I think Aquaman will bomb in America. Internationally, people fucking went crazy for that movie.
But like, I don't. It's strange. It's a strange world right now. So
it is.
And that guy could fuck up a cup of coffee. So like,
you're right. Yeah.
It's like he's already trying to like hurt the legacy of Barbie, like their one hit. So
I know what. Fucking idiot.
The guy is not good at his job. He's patently like evil and greedy, but he's also not good at being those things. Like, he's got bad ideas and then he fucks them up. Like,
yeah.
So, hopefully his name will be relegated to the dustbin of history, like a lot of the United Artists executives that were in
No.
during the Heaven's Gate debacle. Um, Although Diego just revealed to me right before we started that he maybe watched a almost 30-minute shorter version of this movie than I did, which I didn't even
That can't be
realize
right.
uh, was out there. Um, you watched
Yeah, so
a slightly over 3 hour version, and I watched a slightly over 3.5 hour version. So,
actually no, I'm full of shit. Because I had it on in the background again.
mhm.
It my version is 3 hours,
Okay,
38 minutes, and
then we
30.
did.
So that was the yeah.
I was a little worried. I was like,
Um
oh man, I don't want like if someone wants to check this out, I'd rather them see the longer version, just so they know what's
yeah.
going on. But it's I was like, I can't because it is one of those movies where there's kind of a bunch of different edits of it, which will be
Yeah.
relevant. Um,
Oh my, we have to talk about all of
yeah,
it. And then I saw another version that is not I don't think that publicly known. I think it's just for nerds.
mhm.
But we'll talk about that.
What
And
what? Go ahead, we can talk about that now.
okay, it's a Soderbergh cut.
Oh, Soderbergh did an edit. I did not realize.
Soderbergh didn't edit.
Um,
Yeah.
is it 90
I
minutes? That fucking lunatic.
uh it's 100 it's 110 minutes.
Okay.
I think. 100
I don't
what's an hour
I don't
45?
totally get the Soderbergh thing of like taking movies like 2001 and being like cut out all the boring parts.
No, I think he's just
I get he's
he's
a nerd.
practicing,
Like
you
I
know.
get he's a nerd that like likes doing that stuff, but it makes more sense when he does it with like Raiders, where he's just like I just want to strip this movie down to its key parts, right?
Yeah, which is like I've talked about it before. I do recommend people do that. Just watch the lighting and like the
Oh
camera
yeah,
movement
no,
and the blocking, and it's so
that
great.
one makes sense to me.
Hmm.
I'm gonna take out the boring parts of 2001 makes a little less sense to me.
Yeah.
In this age where we're having this discourse about whether or not sex scenes should be in movies. We seem to be having this conversation every.
I know, I know.
But also, I think what people are forgetting is that, like, sometimes movies are supposed to have boring parts. Uh,
Yeah, I people didn't feel that way about this movie, but I will just say since I brought up the Soderbergh cut, he calls it the butcher's cut, right?
mm-hmm.
And on the web page, which I will link down
Yeah,
below in the description because I do think it's interesting further studying, and I'll talk a little bit about why that is too, or why I find it interesting. Um, on the page above the video link, it says obsession, noun. Number 1, preoccupation. 2, state of being obsessed. 3, uncontrollable persistence of an idea. Synonyms: mania, fascination, fixation. And here's the description of this. As a dedicated cinema fan, I was obsessed with Heaven's Gate from the moment it was announced in early 1979. And unfortunately, history has shown that on occasion, a fan can become so obsessed they turn violent toward the object of their obsession, which is what happened to me during the holiday break of 2006. This is the result. Um, Marianne Bernard. Yeah. Strange guy, that Soderbergh, but I'm a fan.
who's his lawyer that like because like what he does is technically protected under free use, right? Like he
Hmm.
can do this.
Well, they're educational
I
purposes. It's all
I
educational
get that, but
purposes.
also every YouTuber should be provided the same resources who makes videos.
Oh, I completely agree.
So
Like,
Soderbergh, maybe give us the name of your legal team because clearly I know studios would come after him if they felt like they could.
yeah.
Uh,
I mean, I'll never forget none of the Alien retrospectives back in the day I had any fucking problem with until Alien Resurrection. Not even Prometheus and Alien Covenant did I have problems with. The newer
oh yeah,
ones.
and then we
But it was like, well, Alien Resurrection is fucking
yeah.
we gotta stop them from uploading that video. Fucking, I don't know. I don't know how any of this shit
Well,
works.
it's all bots, so like it's all automatic now, which is now making like videos unwatchable sometimes. But they
Yeah.
have to edit them to such an extreme, and now they're like, well, you can't even show guns in videos because that'll stop gun violence. Um, yeah, YouTube's
Yeah.
floundering basically. Everyone's falling apart. They don't know what to do.
I know.
It's the best.
It's bad.
It's amazing. Uh, Everything is so fucking great. how highly, highly humorous.
It's a lot.
Yeah.
It's
So,
what else is a lot is this
oh
movie.
yeah, this fucking nearly 4 hour movie.
Yeah. I'm Matt. You have more familiarity with this movie than I do.
Yes.
Um, do you want to describe what it's about in a
All
sentence?
right. It is.
I actually don't think it's that hard, but go ahead.
Well, here's the funny thing. If what I'm about to say is like if you go, "Hey, what's Goodfellas about?" and I went, "It's about the Latanza heist," right? Which is like
Hmm.
technically that's what Goodfellas is about, correct? But
Yes.
that's not. That doesn't sum up Goodfellas. Heaven's Gate is technically about the Johnson County War, which is a real historic event that happened between like land barons and European immigrants in Wyoming. Uh, Lasted a lot longer than it's depicted in this movie, but it is a real event. So that's technically what Heaven's Gate is about.
Hmm.
What it's also about is it's about 219 minutes long.
I thought you were going to talk about the themes.
Oh, why would I? No,
I'm going to take
we can get
a
to.
stab in the dark really quickly,
Mhm.
and I'm going to imply that you are not a super fan of this
Oh,
film.
you are completely wrong. I love this movie.
Okay,
You
okay.
are 100% wrong. I love this movie, flaws and all, of which there are many flaws, in my humble opinion. But
Hmm.
here's my hot take. Diego, I don't want you telling anyone this, though. This stays between us.
Okay. All right.
I like it more than The Deer Hunter.
Okay, there's a little bit of a hot
I like it
take.
more than Michael Cimino's masterpiece, The Deer Hunter.
um
That's partly that's a whole lot of like weird biases. I have biases against Vietnam movies, uh,
mhm.
which seem to be mainly about how hard the war was on our boys.
Yeah.
It hit me once that I was like, one of the few Vietnam movies where I actually see the perspective of the fucking Vietnamese is fucking Good Morning Vietnam with Robin Williams.
I know. I know. That's not great.
Yeah,
I mean, even my beloved Spike Lee's The Five Bloods,
yeah.
terrific movie. I think top five of his career. Um, and
I'm
it
not
is a different
saying
perspective. It's about the black Americans that got wrangled into it, but it's still American
yeah,
troops.
and I'm not saying there shouldn't be movies about that. I'm just saying we should also have, if there was this other wave of movies, um,
Yeah,
be
yeah,
a little
yeah.
more appreciative. But
Hmm.
so yeah, Heaven's Gate, his follow up to The Deer Hunter, that destroyed everyone involved basically.
Yeah, I had this idea in my head, this monumental idea that he was like, "Oh, this is Michael Cimino is like this legendary filmmaker before Heaven's Gate," and to some extent he is because The Deer Hunter, is such a well respected movie, and I do love The Deer Hunter. But he's only got two movies before that.
Yeah,
He's primarily a writer before that.
and it is this thing, but I think it is something where The Deer Hunter was such a powerful movie when it was released that people are like, this is clearly the beginning of a great career. Like, people are like, this
Hmm.
guy is gonna be the next great director. Like, they were basically crowning him, and then this is his follow up, and he never recovers in the critics' eyes, at least. Uh,
No, and that's a lot of my first notes on this movie. Like I went back and like listened to Siskel and Ebert talk about it, and they're like excited to tear it
no,
down.
well, that we will get to that.
No, no, there's a reason for that.
There's a reason
There are
that
reasons for
some of
that.
us might find very familiar as we go into details of it. But to defend Siskel and Ebert a little bit, to defend some of those critics, a lot of them. So this movie famously has a premiere in New York City. It's basically a premiere to get it out the door so it can qualify for Oscars, right? It played for
Hmm.
like 1 week in New York. It gets it gets savaged by Vincent Canby, who's the critic for the New York Times. I believe his one quote was that Heaven's Gate is like a 4 hour forced walking tour of one's own living room, which is a pretty brutal line. And
Yeah.
in a panic, which we will go into what the panic, but the movie was hastily re-edited and lost over an hour, I think. of footage and was re-released, and a lot of the critics are reviewing that edited version. A lot of them. Now, that being said, a lot of them are basically like, there's nothing good in this movie, which is a crazy thing to say. Um, and we will get more to the kind of feeding frenzy that happens around this movie.
Yeah, I'm looking at his filmography, and I didn't realize I think it's worth mentioning that again, like he was primarily a
Mhm.
screenwriter outside of his directing stuff. He worked with Spielberg
Yeah,
on an unpublished screenplay.
yeah. He was one of those guys where he supposedly, like, when he died like a decade ago at this point, I think.
He died in 2016.
2016, so like, not that long ago, but it's coming up.
Yeah, yeah.
uh, yeah, he allegedly was sitting on a lot of scripts when he died, and his producer, Joanne Corelli, who was the producer on this movie, although maybe not. No, yeah, she's credited. Um, she's like, she runs his kind of, I guess it would be like, a state now, and she's been trying to get them published or made in the movies in some way since his passing.
Mm.
'Cause,
I'd love to read some of those.
yeah, I'm sure they'd be interesting. He's an interesting guy because he's not like a lot of the other new Hollywood guys. He does not start in film. He was primarily a painter and an architect before. Like that, those were his obsessions.
Hmm.
Got into advertising and then started selling screenplays, and then just got to make a movie, Thunderbolt and Lightfoot, starring Clint Eastwood and Jeff Bridges, and it kind of becomes this surprise hit. And then off of that, he gets The Deer Hunter, which sweeps the Oscars its year. He almost falls backwards in the film, like it wasn't like something he set
Hmm.
out to do, and but he has these obsessions that are a little different than you would expect from other directors. In fact, I was on the Criterion. There's an audio interview with him and Joanne Corelli where they kind of just talk about the movie, and it's one of those where you get a kind of glimpse into how his mind works. He says that he began his fascination with the Johnson County War began because he was reading up on the history of barbed wire, and in his mind, he was like, barbed wire is like a really important thing in the history of how we settled the West. Like, we put up fences and shit like that. And he said, in reading up on that, he discovered this thing called the Johnson County War. And so it's like, when you think like that's where he's starting from, it starts to explain a lot of the ideas and themes that maybe went into this movie.
You know what? That makes a lot of
Yeah, it
sense.
does.
I don't know what it is. Like the painting thing makes sense. Like, okay, you like painting, it's like a form of expression. I can see why you want to do
Yeah.
that and move into movies. I think the architecture thing's super underrated. Like I didn't think about like pulling and assorting a list of other filmmakers and artists that like architecture and then go into film, but like off the top of my head, I don't know, Michael Mann probably is a big fan of architecture, right? Um and I just think
Well,
like
there's
I see why the crossover is there.
Yeah, there are certain people. I wouldn't even say it's an obsession with architecture. It's more just like there are directors that are very clearly obsessed with how things are put together. You know what I'm saying? I
Hmm.
think with Cimino, he has that mix of painter and architect that he's definitely attracted to aesthetics that I think serve him. Honestly think serve him well as a filmmaker. Um, but yeah, he gets he. This is, but he is not, mainly because of this movie. He is not talked about in the pantheon of directors. Uh, no
Hmm.
one really going to bat for him, and he has a awkward career. Um, he has like his follow up to this is Year of the Dragon, which is based on an Oliver Stone screenplay and is produced by Dilo De Laurentiis. That was accused of racism for how it portrays Asian Americans. And Cimino has defended it, saying that he was trying to portray how racism exists in the United States. And he's definitely one of those guys, kind of like a. He is. I mean, it made sense that he would work on a screenplay with Oliver Stone because they both kind of have like, we're gonna shove this shit in your face type of thing. Uh,
Mm.
comes with the new Hollywood. I haven't seen Year of the Dragon in forever. I cannot tell you where I ultimately fall on that debate. But that's also famously the ripple effect of that movie is De Laurentiis changes the name of Red Dragon to Manhunter for Michael Mann because he believed Year of the Dragon flopped because it had dragon in the title. And then it also has the residual effect of um, I'll let the protests against that movie kind of spark a movement, not incorrectly, but then also like that's what led to some attacks on Big Trouble in Little China, who were fearful that movie would be another Year of the Dragon in terms of its racism, um, which
Mm,
kind of hurt that movie in being seen as the satire it is. He also does the Sicilian. Have you ever seen the Sicilian?
I have not.
Sicilian is crazy because it is technically the sequel to The Godfather. Um, Mario Puzo, he writes he writes The Godfather, writes the screenplays for Godfather 1, 2, and 3, I believe. He also, but his book sequel is a book called The Sicilian, which they adapt. They're not allowed to use any of the characters from The Godfather, obviously for rights reasons. And that's another famous movie where it was like kind of savaged on its release, and there is a director's cut that people stand by as like actually that's a secret masterpiece. That his director's cut. It was put out by Shout Factory a few years ago. I believe it's out of print. I've never seen it. I think the big hurdle with that movie is that Christopher Lambert is the lead in it, and he's not. I don't have anything against the guy, but he's not exactly great in it. And then he does the remake of Desperate Hours, and that's another one where there's allegedly an edit of the movie that is supposed to be much better, but it's never surfaced. There's some people doubt the footage even exists. But that's another one that was savaged, and both Siskel and Ebert put it on Worst of the Year lists. Then he does a movie called The Sun Chaser, which I have never seen, which is a crime movie, I believe. Uh, and that's like his last movie is '96, and then he lives for like another 20 years without making a movie. He makes a few shorts in that time, nothing much, but it's a very odd career for someone who started with as much promise as he did with The Deer Hunter.
The last thing he officially directed was a segment in something called To Each His Own Cinema. Have you heard of that or seen
It's
it?
the short. It's the what do you call it? Like they got a bunch of directors to do shorts about cinema.
Yeah.
I
And like the whole
seen
like
the whole thing. But I've definitely seen some of the shorts. I've seen the Coens definitely.
yeah, your mileage will vary on anthology movies like everyone's does. Yeah, but I really admire that. Like even if I don't love every director that works on it, but it's like yeah, the Coens, Iñárritu, speaking of people I don't love, Zhang Yimou, Jane Campion, Olivier Assayas, Tsai Ming Lang, Lars von Trier, again, another person maybe I'm not a huge fan of, Gus Van Sant, unfortunately Roman Polanski, David Cronenberg, Wong Kar-wai, Albus Kiarostami, like Ken Loach, David Lynch, Wim Wenders, like fucking so many people
Yeah.
work on this shit. Beat Takeshi Kitano,
Hmm.
uh, of basically 10 masterpieces.
Yeah. It's a good lineup. But Nicotano, is he retired? Did he announce he was retiring?
Oh, I don't know. He just has a movie coming out this year.
Yeah, I thought I heard like I remember somewhere where he said like that might be his last movie, but also like there's a lot of those stories that seem to go around, and then the guy immediately comes in being like, "What the fuck are you talking about? I'm still doing movies." Like,
Yeah.
like,
Yeah, I mean, like, love the guy, but Hayao Miyazaki, he's retired like 3 times.
yes,
You know,
I,
Steven Soderbergh has retired like three
yeah,
times.
this one might be it for Miyazaki because like he's
Yeah,
getting.
he's up there. He's up there now.
And the original title for the movie wasn't it called like How Do You Live initially? His newest one that's coming out.
Oh yeah, yeah, I think so.
And then he described it as like a letter to his grandson because he knows he's gonna be dying soon, which is
Oh fuck.
ominous.
Yeah.
Ominous, man. Um, hey, do you want to know how I know Takashi Kitano?
Um, I genuinely have no idea what you're gonna say right now, so you should just say
All
it.
right. He had a very popular show in Japan. Do you know about this?
No, see what I mean? I had no fucking idea you were going here.
A
Please
game
continue.
show called Takashi's Castle. It was a game show that
Okay.
ran in like the late '80s, and it's a lot of like you have to like navigate the castle. It's the show Wipeout that's on TV now.
Yes.
It's basically like that, but in Japan. And he was the host along with another guy. And because he started as a comedian, right? I think that's his story, is that he was a comedian and then he kind of became a actor and director.
Mhm.
Takashi's Castle was re-edited and dubbed and released in the United States on Spike TV as a show called Most Extreme Elimination Challenge.
Oh my god.
Do you have any memory of this? Like
No.
early, and it's just like it's a game show, and they just took it and they just edit it and they just make people say kind of crazy things when they're like, it's a joke on different levels. That
Mm.
was my introduction to him, and I had no idea. Like, it was a weird show because it was mainly just an excuse to watch people fall down and get hurt, which, as an 8-year-old, was the height of comedy.
Oh yeah, yeah. America's Funniest Home Videos got heavy duty play
Yeah,
in middle school Diego's life.
it's basically that, but like a weird edit of a Japanese show version of.
Mm.
Um, and some people know what it is. It's just funny to think about when, like, years later, when I'm watching shit like Outrage or Battle Royale, being like, oh shit, it's that guy. Like,
Yeah. You know, it's not quite the same level as that with you, or for you, but my introduction to him was when I was taking Japanese in high school, and my professor or teacher showed us the movie Kikujiro,
really?
which Takeshi Kitano directed. It is a very heartwarming, light road trip comedy about a guy helping this kid
Mm,
find his mother during summer.
mm.
Um, it is so beautiful, so kind, so funny. I'm like, when I got older and I remembered that, I was like, I gotta fucking watch the rest of this guy's stuff. What else has he been in? And then I watched like Sonatine and the Outrage,
Yeah,
Beyond Outrage,
violent.
eventually Outrage Coda. um, Incredible filmmaker. We're not here to talk about him, but I will find a way to talk about some of his movies.
Maybe we'll find a way. He's a fascinating figure.
Yeah, I love his stuff
They
so
kept
much, and
trying to
obviously
make it
great actor.
happen in America, and it never really worked.
Last thing he was in here was like Ghost in the Shell,
Uh,
the fucking live action one, which is fucking miserable.
mhm.
He's in Battle Royale. I think a lot of people know him from that too, because Quentin Tarantino sucks that movie's dick.
Yeah,
And
that's the best movie made in like the last 25 years. He said like fucking 10 years ago or whatever.
yeah, he's got his own opinions. He's allowed to have his
Yeah, I like
opinions.
that movie. It's just that's like okay.
Yeah.
Although I wouldn't pick Battle Royale, but I would similarly probably make a choice where I'm like, yeah, best movie of the last 10 years. It's fucking some bullshit. Like, it's where you just pick a fucking movie that is like only for you. But
Yeah.
uh,
I wonder what that movie is for me because we're gonna fucking go deep on Heaven's Gate right now. This is the last piece of bullshit I want to throw. I don't know what that choice would be for me.
mm.
Maybe Nope. Honestly,
Nope's
like
pretty great, but I
that.
also I put Tar above Nope. So
Yeah, yeah. I mean, Tar's a good choice. I'm not gonna fight that choice,
yeah,
honestly.
I think mine it might be James Gunn's Super, which like I put in my top 10 of the decade.
Yeah, that is like strange
Yeah.
to me. I mean, I do like that movie now because again, I revisited it before we decided not to do anything with his stuff, and it was like, you know what? Yeah, this is. It's not just off-putting. Like there's real, like, I'll say, brilliance happening here.
Maybe you should give another off-putting movie a chance.
I know.
Save
I
your reputation.
We will.
Uh,
We will. Within the next 6 months, that will
yeah,
happen.
we
So
might have tricked Diego into doing something, but
yeah.
yeah, I don't know. That's probably the closest because I am a big defender of that movie, and oddly, I think it has actually aged better, even with the insane subject matter.
Yeah.
Um,
And that literal director's same career.
yeah,
It's kind of.
that's what's crazy about it, but it's also like it's fucking Joker before Joker and significantly better. So
Yeah.
among other films, uh, also a movie that basically almost made James Gunn quit directing.
Yeah.
But now he's
But that's also like
uh,
an industry thing.
yeah. Now he's in charge of the whatever.
Well, speaking of box office bombs, because Superman will probably do okay, and I bet it will even be a good movie. Like I keep saying this, but I want to really reiterate this because I'm not shit talking one of my favorite writer directors. No one's gonna give a shit about anything else around that movie.
Yeah,
Like they just don't care anymore.
yeah. The shared universe thing, I think it's official. It's dead. Like it just didn't pan. It only worked the one time for Marvel, and it's not.
It worked for a decade. Hey, look, whatever. Shit, I'll shit talk them to high heaven, but you did it. You got to pack it up now
Yeah,
because you're just gonna be wasting hundreds of millions of dollars.
I don't.
So,
I just don't think they know how to stop. I mean, 'cause
oh no, they don't. So that train's gonna keep going until it fucking barrel rolls off a cliff,
yeah.
and then it'll crash into the depths of hell itself.
What do you think really is the shift that is why it's not working anymore? Um,
I
is
think
it just audience exhaustion? Or
I think it's audience exhaustion. I think it all does go back to 9/11, like we joke a lot, but I do think it's very real. Like we talked about it with Dark Knight trilogy, Raimi trilogy, like
obviously,
the idea that, the individual can like save themselves and each other and everyone around them, right? That's a very like American thing.
mhm,
And then eventually as people progress, and even though superheroes did be kind of become like the cultural touchstone, like this is our whatever, this is the new wave of cinema
mhm.
in a way. People maybe argue, not real people, but like teenagers and people on TikTok, and they get very defensive about it. I think real people are too busy to keep up with this shit. At the end of the day, I think it's like, especially right now, there's all this wage inequality and like disparity fucking every corner of the
I
globe.
think we just don't.
I was supposed to keep up with the 12 Marvel shows that have come out in the last 2 years, like,
Yeah,
no.
I think it's a lot of that. Not even just that, but also you need. I think a big reason for the success of the MCU was it being like early in the YouTube era, right? So if you didn't know
Hmm.
the character, you just type the name into YouTube, and there'd be some nerd in his basement explaining who the character was. And
Yeah.
I think that was a big part of the shift. And now I just think that people. I think you're right. I think people just don't have the time to care that much about these things anymore.
Yeah, and I think younger people might. This was like a lot of people's gateway to like going to the theaters regularly, right? I
But
think that's okay to
there's
say.
a difference between enjoying the movies, but then going hard in on the mythology, right? That
Yes, and I think that's where the dividing line really is.
mhm.
And, fucking people just can't do that
I think
anymore.
it's of just they're more into video games, right? And that's not a ding,
Hmm.
but I think it's just there's more videos about they're more interested in Minecraft tutorials, right? Like that's like
Hmm.
the biggest genres on YouTube. And I talked to my Gen Z cousins, and they were like so into the Minecraft thing. It was kind of crazy that like how into it they were, and like that was like a huge part of their childhoods. And
Yeah.
it's just different. Um,
I'm gonna remake the sets of Heaven's Gate in Minecraft.
why not?
Yeah.
Just the way Michael Cimino intended.
Yeah.
Him and Bill.
Although then I'll get angry and I'll be like, no, this isn't fucking working, and tear the set down
Yeah,
and do a different set.
yeah. Why not?
Which is something he did
No,
allegedly.
that's something he did, and also something I did in Minecraft all the time.
Yeah, see, there you go. If anything,
Except
Michael Cimino isn't all of us.
when I did it, it only cost me personally time. With Michael Cimino, it cost a lot of people a lot of time and a lot of money.
Yeah, Matt, did you know? You probably did, but I want to tell you anyways for the audience. He was given an initial budget of $11.6 million.
Yes.
What was the final budget on the film?
Some have estimated it at 4 times that, $44 million.
Yes. 44 million is the alleged number. That may be higher even, it may be slightly lower,
Yeah,
but that's in the ballpark.
so he went way over what he
Yeah.
asked.
Uh-huh.
Oh,
And at the time, that's a pretty big budget.
yes. Be hard to
It's a
make.
very big budget. Yep.
How much did it make, Diego?
$3.5 million.
Wow, that's not even close.
Nope.
That
It is a third of the initial budget. No, it's less than a third of the initial budget. It is that is depressing to compare to the final budget.
yeah, not good.
No, it is all bad. Matt, I haven't given my opinion on the quality of the film yet.
I
Would you like me to do that now?
go ahead.
I think it's really good.
All right.
I do love this movie. It's got fucking big
It's
flaws.
got some choices.
It's got choices. I am super glad it exists, even if I'm not crazy about maybe the way it came into existence,
Yeah. No, there's
which would we have to talk about at some point. Um, Fascinating movie. To go back to the critical lambasting of this film, my boy Siskel and Ebert again. They were really shitting on the look of the film.
yeah.
I don't
Well, that's
understand. Like,
not only that, Ebert opens his written review talking about why does the movie look like this, being like that is the most. He's like that is the first most obvious question. Why does this movie look so ugly? And that is the craziest take,
yeah,
which
that might be his worst take.
which is saying a lot for Ebert.
I,
I mean,
yeah,
Ebert honestly, like I've been revisiting a lot of Siskel and Ebert lately for some fucking reason, and it is one of those.
because it's funny to watch them want to kill each other.
Yes, there's that, but there's also just I think Ebert said it so, and I think it's right where it's the thing of like you don't have to agree with a critic, but their criticism, even if you disagree, should be able to sell you on the movie, right? Like if it's like, oh, I understand why the critic didn't like it, but I could see myself going out to see this movie, right? You know,
Mm-hmm.
where
Yeah.
if he's calling the Friday the 13th movies like disgusting trash, it's like, well, I'm there, like it's just how it is. Uh,
Yeah.
but it's crazy to be. It feels like the thing you would say about this movie is if you hate everything about it, you're like, well, the cinematography is pretty gorgeous, and it's even like them. They're like, no, and maybe it was just. I honestly think part of it is this movie feels a little ahead of its time in some ways. You know,
Mm-hmm.
I feel like this more. Uh, what would the term be? Um, this sort of it's almost like a lyricism to the way the story is told, you know? Um,
Yeah.
it takes, for an example, it takes an hour to actually get to Johnson County in this movie, right?
Yep.
In that time, how many scenes are there? So there's about an hour of film. Uh, there are maybe by the time we get there, three extended sequences, right?
Mm-hmm.
Two extended sequences, one like button end to them. There's the prologue graduation at Harvard, which is there's like individual sequences within that, right?
Yeah.
But it's very much a prologue. Then there's the introduction of Christopher Walken and like him and his relationship to the European immigrants. And then there's the extended sequence of Chris Christopherson stopping at what is it? Casper, Wyoming, on his way to Johnson County. And there's like a whole, there's a bunch of little sequences in there, right? There's like him with the
Mm-hmm.
cart. There's him at the general store. There's him meeting the railway attendant. There's the going to the stock growers association and running into his old friend from college. Um, and like those, but it they don't it I don't know how to say it. They're all just like these really extended sequences,
Mm-hmm.
and I feel like people maybe brushed up against that.
Yeah.
And the cinematography definitely reflects this sort of. I wish I had a fucking better vocabulary. Like just it reflects how the film looks and feels. Like which is very obvious to say about cinematography, but it feels like they were trying to make this sort of um, almost I don't know, like I don't want to
Like painterly.
paint.
Could I say painterly?
Really is like feels like the obvious one to go to, right?
Maybe it's not wrong though.
Yeah,
You know.
yeah, you're probably correct. I mean, it is that thing of like I mean, it almost feels like some a movie we almost did, um, JMW Turner paintings, uh,
Mm-hmm.
the weird like environments, but also like the encroaching civilization and like a JW Turner painting and like just one canvas can say a lot, even politically, about the societal changes that were going on at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And, it feels like this movie is aiming for something different. And it makes sense as the natural extension of The Deer Hunter, another movie where there is an hour-long wedding sequence before we even get to Vietnam, right?
Yeah.
And it feels like the natural extension of that, which is partly what confuses me about why critics were so baffled. Um, but again, they were also operating with the other edit of the film, a lot of them. So
Yeah.
that doesn't
Yeah.
help things.
And a slight change in the edit can fuck up
Yeah.
a movie. Like it just can. I think I've talked about it before, but one of the first like uh assignments I had when I was studying like one of the few filmmaking production classes I took. Um we all were assigned groups and we had to do a short film in a week, right? Like a 1 to 3 minute long short film or something like that. And the next step of the assignment after getting all the footage together was all right, everyone share the footage with your individual group members. Everyone has to edit it individually.
Mm.
Don't talk to each other about it. Just do it in class and it's due next week, right? And everyone comes back with such a different style
Mm.
and look and like even like the sounds of it. Um it was a really fascinating experience and it was also like very invigorating creatively and like inspiring to see like everyone has their own voice,
Yeah.
even like if stuff like, well, I didn't really like that version of it or I didn't like that, but like everyone's got their own thing and that could be better or worse. That could make a movie better or worse too if you're not all on the same page, or god forbid even like, like what I assume happened with Heaven's Gate initially. Like it probably was just too fucking long, because I'll be honest, I think the movie's still a little fucking long. I don't think many people would debate that. I don't think there's like individual stuff I'd cut off the top of my head, but there's maybe, like
I have
it is 3.5 hours.
I have felt that way on certain watches. I didn't feel the length as much this time, but I also did break it up a little bit, like because the Criterion edition I have, it's a DVD copy. It comes on 2 discs, so you kind of get a break. Where the last half is significantly shorter. It's just 90 minutes compared to the rest of the movie.
Hmm.
So that certainly helped things. But I do kind of love this style of epic where there's just kind of like long sequences like this.
No, I do too. This is why I'm gonna go to bat for this movie today. Not that I fucking need to. Honestly, I think a lot of film nerds will go to bat for this movie
It
nowadays.
has turned around finally. But when I
Yeah.
first discovered it, that was certainly not the reputation. Uh,
Hmm.
Now, to go back to my history with Heaven's Gate, the first thing I learned about Heaven's Gate was that it was a flop, obviously. There was a documentary. There used to be a TV channel called Trio. And Trio used to produce, they used to do this thing where like they would air pilots for TV shows that didn't get picked up among a bunch of, oh, cool sound effect.
Oh yeah, sorry. I'm refilling my
No, no,
coffee.
it's fine. It was fine. It's just like, oh, hey, we got production value.
Yeah.
They used to have a lot of like they would air reruns of shows that maybe didn't work or just stuff. But they also did like documentaries, and one of them they did was a documentary called "The Final Cut: The Making and Unmaking of Heaven's Gate," which is a like it's about an hour and a half long breakdown of the movie and what happened and what led to it. Now, it is based on a book also called The Final Cut. Um, that was written by a man named Stephen Bach, who was the senior vice president and head of worldwide productions at United Artists during the time that Heaven's Gate was made. And he admits it in the opening that he's a little biased. I've read that Michael Cimino is very critical of what was written down in the final cut and in its subsequent documentary, but I could not find what he said in as a response. I just read that he was critical of what Stephen Bach had said, but I personally it felt like it was a very even-handed account of what happened. It blames Michael Cimino for some things, mainly going over time and budget, but it also paints a sort of incompetence on the United Artists executives at the time as being some of the main culprits. So
Mm.
the first thing I learned about this movie is that it was a flop, and then I see it on cable occasionally, different edits of it, and I never really sat down to watch it, but I was always fascinated with it. So when Criterion put out a copy of it, when they put out the new edit of it, it was a like it was kind of a like first sale that came up afterwards. I purchased it, and it was like a purchase without even really seeing the thing. And I sat down with my friend Connor, who might be listening. You might remember this, and we sat down and we watched this fucking movie, and we were both kind of like baffled, being like, well, yeah, it's a pretty long and pretty fucking indulgent, but like we don't, it's not this fucking train wreck that its reputation is, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
I will say the funniest moment in that watch is the scene where Chris Christopherson rolls up at the town meeting to be like, there's a list of names, and I was like, oh, I just said during the screening, please read every name. Like, I was like, please do it. I hope they don't, but I was like, there's 100 names on this list. I'm like, I hope he reads all 100 just to see how it happens. But it was one of those where it was like, yeah, I don't get why people are so down on the movie. And then on more rewatches, I've come to enjoy it even more. And yeah, it's really grown on me. It is not without its flaws, but I also think the flaws of Heaven's Gate are not abnormal to Heaven's Gate.
Mm-hmm.
I think you can see a lot of criticisms I will have of the movie, and you can apply them to a lot of other late new Hollywood era films. Uh,
Yeah.
and it was weird that this was this one that was singled out. And you are correct that now its reputation is certainly turned around. There are definitely people who are critical of it. I think most people are kind of like, it's okay. Like that seems to be the general consensus, right? Like,
Yeah, I mean, there's my other boy, Mark Kermode, probably my favorite working film critic today,
yeah,
who also doesn't like this movie.
hmm
Like I love him, even when I disagree. I think that's what makes him a great
yeah,
critic. But every once in a while, when someone brings up like best director's cuts or like like reclaimed works of art, whatever, and he was like, "No, Heaven's Gate was bad when it was released, and it's bad now. It's bad always." Like he has like little like ticks that I really
yeah. It seems that
appreciate. It
there's
makes him
some
human.
where he's put his flag down. No offense to the man, but he's put it
Yeah,
down,
yeah.
and he's like, I'm not moving no matter what happens.
Yeah, yeah.
Because
He's British. He's not
yeah,
perfect.
similarly with like I think he hated The Big Lebowski on release or one of the Coen Brothers movies, and like
You might be right about that,
and
yeah.
he's like, I'm giving it a try, and like you can tell that he like no offense to the man, he kind of wants to say I was wrong, but he can't bring himself to say I was wrong. He's also similarly with like he's like he thinks Tarantino was brilliant until he pivoted to the genre stuff, and
Yeah, he's pro up to Jackie Brown,
yeah.
which I didn't discover until recently.
And so he's very like, and you can see, I can kind of see it where he's like, he's annoyed with Tarantino's choices, but it sometimes gets in the way of him actually talking about the movie, of which there are
Yeah.
always fair things to criticize. So it feels
Yeah,
like Heaven's
yeah.
Game would be one where he planted the flag a little much and now doesn't want to back down.
Hmm.
Because it's not like, I mean, I think, no offense, this might be a little harsh to say, but I think part of the critical reevaluation of Heaven's Gate comes with the fact that a lot of people who were critics at the time either aren't working or have since passed away, that they aren't
Hmm.
there to come in and be like, okay, I was wrong, because we love Siskel and Ebert, but they were two guys who were often reluctant to admit when they were wrong.
Oh yeah, oh yeah.
And I did stumble upon Ebert putting Unforgiven on his top 10 of whatever year Unforgiven came out and admitting that he got the movie wrong during his initial review.
Wow.
Because he kind of gave it a negative review and he's like, on rewatch, I kind of liked it. Now, Siskel still doesn't like Unforgiven, so
Mhm.
there's that whole angle to it. But I think so many people had knives out for it. I mean, it's that weird thing of like, um, I think there's similar parallels with Batman v Superman, right? Where that
Mhm.
movie had a theatrical edit that I think is a disaster, and the director's cut comes out, the ultimate cut, I mean, and people are more receptive to it. But I think there's some critics that they kind of had their feast of ripping BVS apart, and
Mhm.
that they don't want to ever back down and admit there was anything good in those movies. And I say that as someone who did attack BVS pretty hard when it came out, And even though I'm not the biggest fan of the Ultimate Cut, I am willing to admit that it is not the train wreck it is made out to be. Um,
Yeah,
I'm just a little softer on Zack Snyder ultimately. Like,
yeah, and I definitely had my knives out for BVS, and that was a fucking decade ago
yeah, which
almost.
is crazy.
You know?
God, we're getting old.
Yeah.
Um,
Oh my God, BVS came out the same year as Michael Cimino died. I don't know what that means.
his spirit passed on.
His
He cursed one movie on the way out.
Yeah, he was like, if I can't fucking have Heaven's Gate, no one gets their Heaven's
Maybe
Gate.
he inspired Snyder, being like, re-edit these movies.
Oh yeah. He inspired the
Hey,
Snyder
there's
cut.
definitely a connection because guess what movie both directors were obsessed with making that never got made, at least so far.
Excalibur? Like an
No,
Excalibur
an
riff?
adaptation of
No.
Ayn Rand's The Fountainhead.
Oh fuck. Never mind.
They both
I was like so excited for a second and then I was like, I forgot.
yeah. Now it's interesting with Cimino because he does have an architectural background, so it makes.
See, it's all connected.
I know a lot of people that like The Fountainhead who aren't libertarians, so I'm willing to like be like,
Mhm.
okay, as long as they're not trying to do Atlas Shrugged. But
Yeah.
it is one of those like it's interesting that they both have a similar obsession, and then they both kind of have these careers where people don't know what the fuck to do with them. Their theatrical cuts are kind of bad, and then they have subsequent re-edits of their movie. And now he's getting the fucking. I mean, now he's doing Rebel Moon, which will be released in 2 parts, which
Yeah,
I think is.
which was not written as two parts. It was not written as two parts. I think that's worth noting. I've heard it's like a true fucking epic.
Mhm.
Um, like I've heard very positive
It makes
things
me nervous
about
because I
that
don't
movie.
want to watch one half. Uh, I don't want to watch one half of a movie, and it looks like Rebel Moon 2 might not even be in production yet. Uh,
No, they filmed at the same time,
okay, good. All right.
and they split it up in post, which is I'm not crazy about
It says
that.
here it was scheduled to be shot back to back, but scheduled makes me a little nervous.
Hmm.
Maybe not. It is one where I will. I kind of want to. I might wait to see it when both parts are out because I feel like Snyder wrote it as one epic, and it's going to be some 4 hour movie, and they are
Hmm.
adapting a like 3.5 hour epic, so it's
Yeah.
not the weirdest. Um,
Yeah. Fun fact, because this was his plan for a Star Wars movie, right?
yeah,
And it just never came to fruition.
I
This is the kind of thing I'd want him to see, but like there's lightsabers in Star Wars, and so I guess some of the conversation like a couple years ago was like, well, is he gonna like swap out the lightsabers for some other future space sword thing? And then you see the poster, and it's like, oh no, he just did
just made
lightsabers.
Star Wars. Like he just made a Star Wars movie.
Yeah, which you know what? Fuck it, why
God, this
not?
is what I want more out of. Like, don't remake, rip shit
Yeah,
off. Like, do
yeah.
your own thing.
That's how you get Star
Yeah.
Wars. What's the Star Wars version of Heaven's Gate?
The one I'm gonna make. No.
There you go. No.
I was.
Kathleen Kennedy just shows up to set with a gun. Get the fuck out of here.
Yeah. Can you imagine going to Lucasfilm and being like, "What if I did Heaven's Gate but in space?" Like Bob Iger would like shoot me. Like it would. It's one of those things. I
No, it's
actually
got.
think this is some pretty good advice I heard from James Gunn, where he was talking about influences on the Guardians movies, and he was talking
Mhm.
about he was bringing up movies that were like strange or had flopped, and he was like, um, when I pitched it, I used Raiders of the Lost Ark and the Maltese Falcon, and he's like, that was what I used in pitches because you don't want to use flops in your pitch. He was like, this is a piece of advice. When you pitch your movie, you can use flops as influences, but do not tell the executives that. And
I think we brought that up before, but it is good advice and it's worth hearing again. So, your next project, to anyone listening who wants to pitch something, it's inspired by Avatar: The Way of
yes,
Water and Titanic.
they walk in, you're like,
You're welcome. And it's
yeah,
about hope.
it's
And
about
it's
hope
about
and it's about
hope.
family. About
Yes.
family, it's about hope. It's inspired by Avatar 2, The Godfather, and and
And probably The Dark Knight. Throw The
Dark
Dark
Knight,
Knight in there.
Knight, and Avengers Endgame. Those are my top 5 influences.
Also, recently
Yeah, I guess you could
Oppenheimer.
do Oppenheimer now, but you get it's and Barbie. Be like, doing both. That's actually a pitch. You walk in the office and be like, we're gonna actually do Barbenheimer. Like that's
I know some fucking executive would both come and shit
it would
immediately
be
if they
yeah.
heard
It's
that.
just lie to him. That's actually one of
Yeah.
Michael Cimino's quotes where he's like, you always tell the executives what they want to hear, and then you just do what you're gonna do, which might
Yeah. Maybe do it better than what he
explain.
did, but good advice
Yeah, you know.
nonetheless. And I mean better on the set, not in the final edit. That's fine. I can live with a long, messy movie.
All right, so we got to talk about why this movie kind of happened.
Okay.
All
Okay. Let's
right,
do it.
United Artists, the studio. Why is United Artists like famous among filmmakers?
It is. I mean, it's in the title. It's basically like the
Yes,
artist's safe
it's
haven in a
founded
way.
1919 by actually maybe a little earlier than that. I could have my year wrong. By yeah, no, founded 1919 and finally defunct officially in December 2019. It was completely folded into MGM. Um, it was founded by Douglas Fairbanks, Mary Pickford, Charlie Chaplin, and D.W. Griffith, that fun guy, as the
Oh
first
boy.
major studio that would quote unquote be run by the talent. That like, oh, the lunatics are taking over the asylum. Now that's more its reputation. It eventually, it settles in. It operated like a regular studio for a long time, right? Like it wasn't
Yeah.
as
Yeah. Of
unique
course.
as people make it out to be. Goes on for a long time. At the end of the 60s, it gets bought by the Transamerica Corporation. They purchased 98% of UA's stock, which is kind of crazy to think about, which begins a run at the studio, which includes movies like In the Heat of the Night, The Graduate, Fiddler on the Roof, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, Midnight Cowboy, Last Tango in Paris, Annie Hall, Rocky. They kind of have this incredible run, right? Uh,
Hmm.
they also do all the James Bond movies, like all the Woody Allen movies at the time, which at the time people liked, and they're gearing up to do Raging Bull around this time. But the management at United Artists, led by a guy named Arthur Krim, uh, became fed up with how Transamerica's micromanagement style. And there's actually a quote from I was reading from John R. Beckett, who was the head of Transamerica at the time, and he sounded fairly reasonable for an executive, although he does say a lot of insane things, right? Um, and he was the head of the Transamerica stuff, and he's like, we bought the studio because we thought it would help our stock, and it's never hurt us, but it has not made the stock move at all. And he was like, I understand. Like, he's like, everyone working over there, they're tremendously talented. We love all the work they're doing, but it hasn't moved our stock at all, which is a bit of a problem if you have to justify that to shareholders, right? It
Hmm.
basically is this mini like the problem of these publicly traded mega corporations controlling film studios, right? Uh,
Right.
uh, Arthur Krim feeling that UA's autonomy is threatened, fucking packs up and leaves. Takes with them a bunch of the top executives at UA, including Mike Medavoy, who we talked about on the last episode for some goddamn reason. And they found
He
Yeah,
seemed
yeah.
cool.
And they found Orion Pictures. And Orion Pictures is one of those things where, like, it's immediately founded, immediately signs a distribution deal with Warner Brothers. And Orion has its own run that lasts into like the early 90s, right? Like, Orion lasts, and then they
Hmm.
kind of fall apart at some point. But they did have an incredible run. They put out a lot of good pictures. The brand is still around, by the way, but it's very different, obviously. Um, so Transamerica is stuck with all their top talent has left, and now they're stuck with a bunch of middle management people at a film studio that they don't know how to run and they don't know what to do with. And they basically just promote whoever is left. And it becomes very clear that the people at United Artists have to kind of justify their existence. And they're like, well, we got to do something. We have to, in a classic Hollywood move where they have like, they have successful connections. They have Woody Allen, they have the James Bond movies, they're doing Rocky too. But they're like, we have to make our own mark now to show people that this studio is still the artist friendly studio. Some of the top executives get an early screening of The Deer Hunter and immediately sign a deal with Cimino before The Deer Hunter's even out. And it looks like it was a good call because almost immediately after they make this deal, uh, he The Deer Hunter comes out, is a major hit and sweeps the Oscars. So they're like, we're betting on the right horse here. But the management at United Artists was a little weak and maybe didn't know how to handle a guy like Chimino coming in asking for the moon. Uh, and it has somewhat disastrous results.
You say he asked for the moon. I think that might be putting it
Yes.
lightly.
It is the thing we
Um,
talked about with him being like, you always agree to the executives, and then you just do what you're going to do. And there's a story. There's a guy interviewed in the documentary, a guy named David Field, as a producer. He was kind of put in charge of overseeing the movie, and he was like, according to him, he was like, I was a glorified PA on some movie before Heaven's Gate, and now I'm like one of the chief executives in charge of this movie. Like he was like, I was way underqualified to handle this. So
mhm.
when they signed the deal, they go, who are the two leads? And they go, it's going to be Chris Christopherson and Christopher Walken. Everyone's happy with that, right? Like that makes perfect sense. We're good with that. Who's going to play the female lead? Which is the question that the Hollywood studios ask over and over again. Who is going to play the woman in it? And according to them, they tested every actress in Hollywood. They couldn't find someone. A lot of the actresses were turning it down. Um, Chimino comes to them and is like, I want Isabelle Huppert, who at the time is huge in France, right? We
Mhm.
Isabelle Huppert, right? Like her reputation.
Yeah.
Criterion,
Oh no, she's
yeah,
a living
Criterion just did a
legend.
whole series of just her movies, right? Um,
Yeah. There's I just want to say there's a great little like I think it's the Alamo snippet before they play the movie. They like don't fucking talk, right? Um and she has one where she's just like no talk, no noise,
and I
no
believe
sound.
she has yet to make when this is being talked about. She has yet to make her crossover to America. I could be wrong, but I don't think she has made an American film before Heaven's Gate, right?
I think you're
And
correct.
he's like, I want Isabelle Huppert, and these guys are like, okay, it's a French actress. She's not really a name, so we're not happy about that. But how's her English? And Chimino is like, well, she's great. Like it's perfect. She speaks like we do, right? Yeah. And they do test
Mhm.
screenings, and the executives are like, Michael, like she's good, but like we're not. She can't. She doesn't sound American. Like you can hear the French accents. And like Stephen Bach's like, it didn't make sense for the madam of a bordello in the West to be a French woman. Like it's like it didn't make sense. And so like it's a no. And uh, a day passes. Chimino calls up, and he's like, I've thought about it. My choice is still Isabelle Huppert. And he's like, I know we agreed that not on her. And David Field is like, well, we agreed on this. If if you make this sort of agreement, we have to stick to it. It's like now I can't trust you if you back out of an agreement like this. And he said that then like they had an argument over the phone. He said that Chimino told him to go fuck himself and hung up. And so it's this thing of so David Field goes to Andy Albeck, who is described as a quote glorified accountant who was made the head of United Artists, and he's like, "Look, we agreed to this budget, but we're having this conflict with the actress, and if we can't trust him on the casting, we don't know we like how do we know he's going to listen to us, right?" But and
Mhm.
the accountant's like, "Well, what's your worst case number? Like how much do you think this could go over?" And David Field's like, "I don't know, like $10 million maybe." And like Andy Albeck is like, "Well, according to our accountants, like that's fine. We can handle 10." And it's like actually he said if you Isabelle Huppert would be even better. We can get 10 million out of foreign. She's very popular in Europe, so we don't see what the problem is here. And David Field's argument is like, look, it's not about whether or not the budget's going to go over. It's about can we trust him, right? Like can will Chimino listen to us if we request changes, or if will he stick to his schedule? And the guys are like, the numbers are fine. Like, who cares? It'll be fine. And it's this thing of Chimino goes to battle with the studio for the first time and he wins. And it becomes very clear very quickly to everyone, especially Chimino, that no one is going to tell him to stop. Yeah,
Oh
yeah.
God.
It should be said. Again, Chimino has disputed this take on how things went down, but it's regardless of how you look at it, there's no way United Artists approved that $44 million budget. Like, it's not like
Yeah.
it's
Yeah. Yeah.
the producer on this was a woman named Joanne Corelli, who had a lesser role on Chimino's previous movie, The Deer Hunter, and now she's a producer and she's Chimino's friend. She's not going to tell him no, right? Oddly enough, this is
Hmm.
very similar to another 80s film that we have talked about on the show that had a similar production, The Empire Strikes Back, where Irvin Kershner and fucking Gary Kurtz was not reining in Kershner at all, and Kershner had the protection of being Lucas's friend and felt like he could just do whatever he wanted. And that's a movie where the budget doubled while they were filming it, and it took twice as long to make as they thought. It is. It's oddly similar now. Worked out a little better for Empire, but a
Yeah.
little bit
Just a
better
little
for
bit.
them. But it's an oddly similar story. And I guess the story is that a week into shooting, they were 2 weeks behind. It just kept ballooning like that. And then at a certain point, people were like, what are we going to do?
Just repeat that phrase really quick, because that's like, if you ever hear something like that, you're kind of
Which
fucked.
phrase, the what are we going to
It's
do?
no 1 week into shooting, you're 2 weeks behind.
And it
That's
got worse
crazy.
from there.
Yeah, no, yeah. If you fuck up at the beginning like that, it's hard
Yeah.
to bounce
And
back.
at some point in like the middle of production, like it's this thing of like they kind of let Shimino do what he wanted for a while, and no one was bothering to really like reel him in. And at a certain point, it was like if he keeps going the way he's going, it's gonna be the longest film production of all time, and it's gonna be the most expensive movie ever made. Like if the amount of money he is spending per day at this point, if it continues, it's going to be the most expensive movie of all time. Now it got up to 44 million, but I don't think it was the most expensive at its time. I think there were more expensive movies around then, but it's fucking up there.
Hmm.
uh, yeah, and then at a certain point they kind of came down and they were like, "There's a new shooting schedule. You have to hit these points." Like the second half of production changed, and Chimino ended up actually getting ahead of the new schedule. He ended up like he was way behind the initial plan, but he ended up being like 2 days ahead at a certain point while they were filming. And part of it was they hung the prologue over his head where they were like, Michael, we got to cut somewhere. If you cannot stick to this revised schedule, we will not give you the money or the time to shoot the prologue at Harvard. And when they threatened that, Chimino got stuck to the schedule. And
Oh.
according to Stephen Bach, they were like, we were bluffing. Like there was no way we could tell him no. Like we knew he had to shoot it, but we just he bought it. So like whatever helps. Like the problem they also run into is they're like, who do we fire? Like he's the writer and director of the thing. It's his project. Like we can't bring someone else in. And he has just won. He's just swept the Oscar for The Deer Hunter. And we're trying to prove to Hollywood that we're a filmmaker friendly studio. It should be noted that when Arthur Krim left, an open letter was written by 63 producers and directors to the head of Transamerica that included people like Robert Altman, Hal Ashby, Francis Ford Coppola, Burt Reynolds, Martin Scorsese, Francois Truffaut, Kubrick, being like, we think this is a threat to the legacy of United Artists, so you can't fire the guy. Like,
Oh
yeah,
God.
it's a disaster. And I think the dispute is whether or not Chimino was taking advantage of this. Like according to the UA executives, like Chimino knew what he was doing. He knew he was taking advantage of us. That he knew he could kind of write his own check at this point. And I think Chimino is like, no, it just happened that way. Like I didn't set out to do it this way. It's just what happened. And that's I think where the dispute lies. Um, Joanne Corelli, the producer, was fired mid production, although she is still credited on it. They brought in new people to be producers on the film. They were the ones to keep him to the schedule. Um, some of the crazy stories. There's a scene in the movie where the townspeople come to wake up Chris Christopherson, right? They come to wake him up. He's kind of in a drunken stupor because he's had an argument with Isabelle Huppert. Uh, he wakes up and he cracks the whip across the room. You know the scene I'm talking about? Do you remember this? It's kind of a
Yeah, yeah.
They spent an entire day just shooting the master of that scene. An entire day of the master just for that scene, which is just him cracking the whip. That's not even the whole scene.
I know, like, I'm just trying to think
I know.
why.
Yeah, that's the thing. And like, look, I think we both agree the movie's beautiful, right? Like, it looks great. I'm more
Yes.
into it than you are, but we both still like the movie. Here's something that I think is maybe the biggest indictment of Cimino and his inability to like stick to a schedule. I cannot tell the difference as to what was shot before or after the revised schedule was put in place, right? It's not like
Mm-hmm.
you look at this movie and go, well, obviously this was shot when he had an unlimited budget and this was shot later. Like it all looks like the same product, you know?
Yeah.
So I can't really tell. Had he been kept to a schedule, it feels like he would have turned in a movie of similar quality, right? Deer Hunter, another
Mm-hmm.
movie though that went over production, but was quote like it was understandable that it did. It was like anything that happened on that made sense, and maybe could have gotten away with a little bit on this movie, but he went way overboard with it. Um, some other stories. There is a story now. Vilmos Zsigmond, who is the cinematographer of this movie, seems to be the biggest defender of this movie. At least at the time when the documentary came out, he's like, "I love the movie. I don't understand why no one liked it. I don't really. I look at it and I see no flaws in it." Which is like, all right, Vilmos. But
Yeah. I mean, I don't see any flaws from his perspective. I just want to say the great Vilmo Zsigmond is
yeah,
one of the greatest
exactly.
cinematographers, if not the greatest cinematographer to ever work in the
He's
industry.
incredible.
You know?
And he was like, he has like these kind of like quotes that are amazing, where he was like, you can tell they're going around. Did you think it was taking too long? You can tell that was the question. He was like, "Well, it is not my place to judge the artist working. You know, it is him. He is trying to paint an image, and but I did feel in that time maybe we could work a little faster." That's as close as he gets to a fuck you, right? Like that's as close as he
Yeah.
like. And then there's a story where he was like, they were trying to shoot. Here's the insane thing. He was trying to shoot, I think, a sunrise, and before they have like everyone's ready, right, to shoot, and like right before they're ready to go, fucking Overcast comes in and blocks the shot, and they all just sit there, and Chimino does not call break, and they just sit and wait for the clouds to clear. They wait until lunchtime,
Oh my
and everyone's on meal
god.
penalty because they're waiting for this shot. And Vilmos tells the story where someone goes up, like trying to be like, Michael, like I think we can take a break, and he's like, no, no, it's gonna clear up any minute now. And this poor worker was like, yeah, but what about lunch? And Vilmos says, and Michael turns to him and goes, lunch? This is bigger than lunch. And,
Oh my
and,
god. That is the
yeah,
fucking
yeah.
funniest thing
And
I've ever
Vilmos
heard.
finds it very funny. He says, like, so that is Heaven's Gate. Heaven's Gate was bigger than lunch. A very funny quote. Uh, and that's again from a guy who's like he thinks this movie's an undisputed masterpiece. Like he's the biggest defender of the movie, and he's like, yeah, Michael, he was a little different, but yeah, so Heaven's Gate was bigger than lunch. Some of the other
That's
stories.
what a quote.
I just want to get all these out of the way before we talk about the actual movie because they're just kind of fascinating.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah.
the actors that were interviewed in the final cut include Chris Christopherson, Brad Dourif, and Jeff Bridges, all of who appear in this movie. They were the ones who seem to be the most willing to talk. Uh,
Mhm.
Chris Christopherson, again, another big defender of the movie. He compares the reception to Heaven's Gate to the Iraq War.
Whoa.
Says it was a betrayal like the Iraq War. So he's a big like he's very angry about how this movie was treated by the press, which we'll get more into. Jeff Bridges seems to be pretty chill about it. Like him and Dourif are kind of like, yeah, I'm not used to doing a movie where the minimum is like 22 takes. Like, I think that's
But Jeff Bridges is like the ultimate chill guy, though.
Jeff
You
Bridges,
know.
by the way. I think part of the reason why he's like still fond of this movie, he bought the brothel when the production was over, and at least
Oh,
20 years ago, that was still his home. That he turned the brothel set into his home.
all right.
Well, he said like he tells a funny. He's like, we got to the end of production. They were like they were just gonna tear it down, and he was like, someone went like, does anyone want this? And he was like, I'll take it. Like, so he bought the set, which is kind of cute. Yeah, they said they. I think Dourif described it as it felt like workshopping on film, like that they would do these scenes over and over again, and they would do multiple versions of the scene, stuff that you would normally do in like a rehearsal. You know, some filmmakers like to do like extended rehearsals of their movies before they shoot.
Yeah.
He was like it was like doing the rehearsals, but we were doing it on film. Like that's how we did. Like we would do the happy version, we would do the sad version, we would do the angry version. And he's mainly talking about the big like meeting scenes in the movie, right, where everyone's like kind of yelling back and
Hmm.
forth. Uh, Vilmos would say that like he would stop and he would pick the extras individually and tell them where to stand. He'd be like, "You there, you there, you there, you there," which you're spending half the day just doing that. Like,
Yeah.
um,
You never heard of delegating,
yeah,
man?
I mean, it's the thing of
Like,
like, almost like again the painterly thing, which is kind of why I was trying to avoid it because a lot of people bring it up. But he was like a painter, like trying to choose the image, what he was going for. Um, I mean, you can definitely see some of it in the movie, right? You can tell that some of it is very precise. Others, it feels like you maybe didn't need to be that precise, but
I'm glad you brought that up because I have that in my notes. For a guy who's such like an egomaniac and like so overbearingly specific, only a handful of times in the
yeah,
movie, and the movie does look terrific through and through. I don't understand any criticism about that whatsoever. I never really feel like it's that specific in
mm,
some of the blocking or the scenery. Like the landscape stuff is like
yeah,
that's where
the
I see it
landscape,
more than
100%.
having the
Although
characters.
there were some choices in this that I find fascinating, but there are also choices that require, like, at a minimum, 100 extras to be on set. Like,
Yeah,
it's
I mean, even the first fucking scene, the graduation bit.
the graduation's insane, but that was like that's also a sequence that was shot last, so that's like after they've gone through hell, right? Like that's after.
Yeah.
But there's the sequence like in the town, and Chris Christopherson is shot from such a distance, and he's in he's in the background of shots, and then there are people like crossing the camera in the foreground, and it's like it takes a lot of extras to do something like that to
Hmm.
make this town look actually populated and that crowded, and it's kind of crazy to look at. And there are a lot of crowd sequences. I mean, there's like there's the immigrants like moving across like their cattle and shit like that when they're traveling to Wyoming. There's a lot of like stuff. There's a lot of the town stuff, and it just
Hmm.
must have been insane to shoot. Trying to think. I just want to make sure I get like all the big stories out of the way. Uh,
Yeah.
there's that.
Yeah.
There's the multiple takes. Here's something. I have never really understood the stories of Kubrick being like doing 1,000 takes, right? Like
Hmm.
I've never understood that until fairly recently, where I read the book about the production of 2001. And what I learned in that was that, the mistake people make with Kubrick is they think he's this guy who has like this perfect vision in his head and he wants to get it right, right? Like that he's an
Hmm.
exacting filmmaker, right? And when you read about it, what you learn is it's like, no, he's shooting over and over again because he almost wants something he isn't prepared for to happen, right? He's hoping
Right.
to get something that you can't get organically. And I'm like, that maybe that was just Chimino's thing too, right? Like he was hoping for something like that. Uh,
Hmm.
And if that works for some filmmakers, I guess like I've never totally understood it. I've always felt more attracted to filmmakers who are like they show up and they can do, a handful of takes and get the shot, right? They know
Yeah.
when they show up. Um, but it's it's it doesn't feel right for me to judge because I've never made a film. I don't know. When I get on the set, who knows what I could turn into if I was a director, right? Like,
Hmm.
it could be, this is bigger than lunch.
Hmm.
Um, uh, it's it's just strange. Like, it is one where now it's what's crazy about it is that it is not like insanity. Like, there are stories. I think the most credible thing that came out of this is that there were definitely animals hurt while making this movie. You can stir even claims that you can see some horses actually die during the final battle sequence. I don't know how true that is. Uh, I think that's the biggest like real ding against the movie, right?
Yeah, yeah.
There is the like rebuilding of sets and stuff like that, but it is not from this place of chaos. It feels like a lot of what was happening was very deliberate. Um, that this was the plan was to make the movie at this scale this way, and that's what separates it, I think, from other flops. They talk about in the documentary, the final cut, that the executives are like when they realized how fucking out of control things were getting. They have no experience, right? People
Hmm.
have never even worked on a movie before, and they're like, well, what are the other flops in film history that we could maybe learn from? Like, what are the other crazy productions that we can learn from? So, like, they study Cleopatra, right? They're
Hmm.
like, Cleopatra is basically like, let whatever happens and just pray to God that it works out. And like, we can't afford that. The other option was the movie Queen Kelly. You ever heard of Queen Kelly?
I've actually not.
Well, there's a reason because it was never finished.
Uh,
Directed by Eric von Stroheim, starring Gloria Swanson. Now, if you've ever seen Sunset Boulevard, some of the film in that movie where it's supposed to show Gloria Swanson's younger years in it,
mhm.
that is from Queen Kelly. That is some of the unused footage from Queen Kelly. There is a version of Queen
Oh.
Kelly out there, obviously, but like it was one where it was kind of just shut down in the middle of production and never really finished. Um,
Okay. Yeah, I love Sunset
Eric
Boulevard.
von Stroheim
I gotta read
appeared
into this.
as himself in, not as himself, as the butler Max in Sunset Boulevard too. So feels like a very deliberate choice to put Eric von Stroheim in the movie.
Yeah.
Von Stroheim, famously another guy who shot insanely long movies. Allegedly, the original cut of his movie Greed was 42 reels long, which would make it a 9-hour movie, a version that has never surfaced because a lot of that footage is lost at this point. But that movie, I think even the version that's out now is something like 5 hours long, right? Um, you ever seen any of Eric von Stroheim stuff?
Off the top of my head, I don't think I have. Let me see. I'm gonna fucking look it up right now, and then
I mean,
I'm
if you
gonna.
haven't seen Greed, I
Yeah.
doubt you've seen his other stuff. Like, it's Greed is kind of the one, you know.
Yeah. 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 I don't think I have.
Um, so there's that option where it's like, all right, maybe we fire, bring in other people, but then I already explained why they couldn't do that, right? Like they kind of fuck
Hmm.
themselves. Um, and then the other option is they're like, well, then there's Apocalypse Now, which is a movie that like the production went out of control, and it was longer and crazier, and the budget ballooned, and a movie that ended up costing like $31 million, right? And
Hmm.
it's like, but there's a great movie at the end of it. So we like, they're like, the goal was we're gonna try and get Apocalypse Now out of Heaven's Gate. Like we're just gonna try and like get a wrangle on this thing and see what happens. And as someone points out, uh, the problem is that Apocalypse Now is suffering from like typhoons and being shot in the middle of like an actual war and like people having heart attacks, right?
Hmm.
Like a million acts of gods. There wasn't that on Heaven's Gate set. It was just Cimino trying to make this epic. And so like what do you do? It's not a it's not an act of God, it's a very much an act of man. Um, but they crack down on him. They get him a little more under control. Uh, they they get to a new schedule. Things start to turn around. He's ahead of the revised schedule. And then what happens in the middle of production? A freelance reporter named Les Capet, who tried to get on set as a reporter but was denied. They were not getting press passes for the movie. So he then reapplied as an extra. I believe he still appears in the background of a lot of shots, particularly in Johnson County. Lescapé publishes an article where he describes the chaos and the production and the ballooning cost of Heaven's Gate. And that is when the public starts to turn on this movie. That's the beginning of everyone basically, by the time the movie's out, people are like, this thing better be great or we're going to fucking destroy it. And I mean, how
Oh
many times has
no.
that story happened at this point? You know,
Yeah.
and it's painfully familiar these days.
Yeah.
Um, so that's a little depressing. Um,
It is. I mean, I immediately just think of like, I mean, to go back to even the critical response to it, where like everyone's saying like, why is it so long? Why does it look like this? And I don't know. I'm getting a lot of like flashes just to conversations happening right now with film criticism,
mhm.
where not specifically about the sex discourse, but the idea of sex scenes is like, what does it do to advance the plot?
Yeah,
You know, the idea of
that's
plot being like the key mechanic of
yeah,
filmmaking is just not true.
mhm.
It plot is like the result of a narrative that happens. It is the description of things that
Mhm.
happen. I think film is much more lyrical than like a
Yeah.
book, for example. Books can be that too, but it's not like what you go to books for
I mean,
often. Movies, I think you do go for that rapturous
yeah,
experience more
film
so.
is much more elastic, like
Mm-hmm.
it is why although I've been listening, not to shout these guys out because I know some people hate them, but the fucking Blank Check guys have been doing a Park Chan-wook series, so I've been listening to it,
Mm-hmm.
especially with the re-release of Old Boy, and they made a good point I thought with in regards to Park Chan-wook versus Bong Joon-ho in terms of their receptions in the United States, and they talk about Bong as being very good, like not a criticism of either guy, right, but Bong is
Yeah.
good at like kind of like plot heavy stories where like there's a beginning and there's a very definitive end to his stories, right? There's his movies follow a much more structured plot, Uh,
Mm-hmm.
not again, this isn't like 100%, right? Like obviously there's stuff like that, but something like Parasite, which is very much Parasite's basically a heist film, like it's
Yeah.
basically I think that's why part of what helped its appeal. Whereas Park, I think, is willing to leave things hanging at the end of his movies, and leave people with a sort of disquieting discomfort at the end of the movie, right?
Mm-hmm.
Whereas, like Bong, his movies definitely have a definitive end to the point where people mistake the ending of Parasite as a happy ending. People are just
Yeah.
glad to have an ending.
Yeah.
And I think that it just, for whatever reason, it's not true. People are freaking out, being like, "Why is Gen Z watch movies this way?" And I'm like, dude, people were talking about this way when millennials were younger too. It happens every fucking time. But I think there
Mm-hmm.
is just people defer to plot as being yes. Probably because it's like the first thing you can really understand about a movie. It's a lot harder to talk about cinematography, especially when you're younger, as opposed to plot. Like plot is so obviously what is worth discussing,
Mm-hmm.
So I think,
Or even like blocking. I think blocking is a little harder to latch
yeah, yeah. No.
onto. Like it shouldn't be, but it
But you have to
is,
remember
you
that when these
know.
people are talking about, they're like a lot of these people are literal children. So like,
Yeah, yeah, that's why I always kind of check before I start trying to dunk on someone on Twitter
yeah,
now, where I'm like, "Wait, is this a 14-year-old
yeah.
old? It is? Not my
I'm
business."
trying to have my fun. Like I will poke fun at it, but I won't. I'm trying not to single anyone out.
Yeah. I will single out the what those guys, the VFX guys who pivoted to AI. I'll single them out now.
Oh
But like,
yeah. Oh yeah. Did those guys?
yeah.
Yeah, it was one of those guys who did the like.
Well, they said something recently where they're like, "Well, I think the explosion in Oppenheimer would have been way better if it was like CGI." And I'm like, I'm not pro or
Yeah.
anti practical versus CGI. Like Nolan did his thing and I thought he did it wonderfully. It was just like really weird that they were the guys who were like, "I think it would work better this way." It's like you do AI now. Like you don't get to
Hmm.
talk about anything ever.
That's a shame. But
It is. It
yeah,
is.
it's a little weird that those are the dominant. I mean, it's a dominant discussion. It's like it's that plot holes, movie mistakes, and I think that's just because dominant because it's just when you're younger and you're starting to get in the film, they become the more obvious things to focus on. We've all been there, right? Like,
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, of course.
and even when I movie like let's say like a David Lynch film, when I was first introduced to David Lynch, I would like those movies, but I wouldn't be able to tell you why I liked them, right? Like I didn't have the
Hmm.
vocabulary. I didn't really understand what the appeal was. And if I tried to describe them on terms of like plot and shit, a lot of them didn't fit, right? Like and,
Yeah, yeah,
and I think so many of us are just trained to focus on those things. And then unfortunately, you have the people don't take film as art seriously. And then if you just simply don't mature from the time you were, a 16-year-old on film forums and shit like that, you're gonna feel that way forever, right? Like you're just gonna be plot,
right,
plot, plot,
right.
plot. And I honestly, I think it's honestly getting better. I think that now because of the internet, uh, it has democratized film discourse that like now I think we talk about film more I think there's a broader it's a sort of high tide raises all boats type thing where I think we're seeing more and more people talking about plot, right? But I think that's
Hmm.
just because more and more people are talking about movies, and I think that nowadays people have better access to, when I was younger I would have to go find a book like The Five C's of Cinematography, right? To like break down what cinematography is and how that works. You know,
Yeah, which it is essential. It is everyone has to start somewhere. That I think that is the right move that you made.
and well, yeah, and also, but like that. Think about like that takes a certain amount of effort, right? I'm not a ton, but a certain amount that
Hmm.
most people just aren't interested in, and b who the fuck has the time, right? Like if you got a
Yeah.
life, who has the time to go read up on cinematography? But nowadays, in this age of YouTube, yes, there are a shit ton of bad YouTube videos out there, and the bad stuff does rise to the top. But I also think that more people are having access to better film writing and film discussion than ever before. Uh,
Hmm.
and I think that
Yeah.
Gen Z is just right now it's their turn to go through like what about these plot holes? Just being like, and we got to let them get it out of their system, right? And
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
once that's
Yeah.
over, I think they will end up talking about movies better than we're talking about movies. So I'm ultimately optimistic about that. I think that's just gonna be the cycle, in the information age. That is just the
Hmm.
cycle now that there's gonna be this weird anti-sex discourse, which was around when millennials were growing up. Let's not act like it
Yes.
wasn't. Let's stop
Hmm.
this stuff of millennials trying to wash their hands of all the dumb shit we did. Try to act like only the
Yeah.
boomers and only Gen Z. Um, but there were plenty of, you know, I mean, more millennials voted Republican than Gen Z. Part of that is that they're younger, but
Hmm.
that's how it works.
I mean, how fucking often in the last decade did we hear about like, oh, this film failed the Bechtel test, the Bechtel test? Is that the
Apologies,
yeah? Where
the woman who came up with that, who hates her own theory now.
I know. She was like, no, it's barely a starting point. It's to make fun of fucking, it's gender and sex in real life is
Yeah,
complicated enough. Like it's just as complicated. Well, not just as complicated, but it's very complicated to interpret in film as well. And like, just treat every character like a human being, and you should be
do you want
fine.
me to?
That's really what it
Can
comes
I
down
throw
to.
out one? And it's going to be coming from a dumb white idiot myself, and so you could shoot me down
Sure.
if I am completely wrong on this. But
Okay.
the one similar to the Bechtel test, the one I always kind of brushed up against as forms of like, I don't think this is the real criticism some people make it out to be, and I don't think it's as popular, but it was certainly popular when we were younger. The re-editing movies to be like how much screen time, um, like a person of color in the movie has, right? But not just that, it would also be
Hmm.
like here's anytime they spoke in the movie. It's like it's
Hmm.
just that, and I'm like, I don't think that's the criticism you think it is, because you see that get thrown around a lot, where it's like, I mean, that was The Irishman, remember, where it was like she only has one line in the movie, like people are
Yeah.
really upset about that. And I'm like, I don't think that's how you should look at these things, right? Like,
Uh
where there are
huh.
very real discussions about representation on screen, about representation behind the camera, and I think those, yes, 100% worth having. There should be more diversity on the screen and behind the camera. But I just think the way that that was framed was the wrong way to, like, I don't think it was making the point they thought they were making. I think it was ignoring
Uh,
how movies work, frankly.
I tend to agree with you. And again, I am also a heterosexual man, so a white passing Mexican heterosexual man. So maybe I'm if I'm out of pocket here, someone wants to correct me, feel free to. I will not die on this hill, but I do think it tends to be a little reductive. Like, oh, here's the seconds that they spoke in this scene. Here's the seconds that they spoke throughout the rest of the movie. Here's the minutes, whatever. I think it's focusing on a symptom, not a root cause, you know? And like if someone uses that as a jumping off point to start discovering these things and talking about these things, I think at the end of the day that's okay.
Yes.
Like we're talking about critics like fucking planting their flags and being like, "Nope." I think when you start having these more thoughtful discussions and thoughts about art, it is important like how you start, but where you
I
evolve
think
as
there is
well,
a problem that kind of keeps happening where there's a lot of reductive beliefs out there in the world, right? That are like base assumptions for people, you know? Like people are
Mhm.
like if you put a black person in a movie, people are like, what's this forced diversity? And it's like, well, why do you think that's forced? Like, why is that forced in a movie starring all white people isn't, right? Like that's completely
Yeah,
reductive.
yeah.
And I think unfortunately that the response seems to be people on the opposite end of the spectrum introducing their own reductive ideas about like trying like to counteract other reductive beliefs, you know? I think it
Mhm.
struggles to help anyone get anywhere, really, you know?
Yeah.
I think it misses how movies work and how they're made. I mean, talk about this movie. This is supposed to be an epic western, and according to Cimino, like uh, who was a big believer in like authenticity and historical accuracy, was like I wanted to portray the West as it was, not like how it is on film. Um, I don't believe there's a single black person in this movie.
Uh-huh.
Where in the West, which is famously one out of every four quote unquote cowboys were black. So, I don't know the history of Johnson County. Maybe I'm completely out of line, but also it feels a little wrong. I've started to notice,
Yeah.
I noticed it in Oppenheimer where it felt like there was definitely an effort to make the extras more diverse. Did you notice that watching the movie?
Not really, but that's kind of a weird one because historically, not a lot of
Yeah,
diversity in
yeah.
that group.
Well, that was make me wonder. Well, it's that thing of like, yes, historically not a lot of diversity, but also maybe there's always more where like there's always someone we don't know about, right? That like we thought
Right,
there
right,
were
yeah.
more people on schools than we realized for whatever reason. But
Mhm.
but again, at the same point, I think there's maybe in Oppenheimer there is one black character with an actual line in that movie. Now a lot of that has to do with the how the Manhattan Project was put together, but still, like
Yeah, yeah.
not sure if maybe black people don't want to be associated with the Manhattan Project as much, but
Yeah, I think that was like a response to some criticism because some critics were saying like, oh well, it's not a very diverse cast of characters, and everyone's like, no, 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 we this is one we're good. We can sit out on this one.
yeah, don't.
White people, you guys get the credit for this one.
There's even, I mean, there's a moment in that movie where it's like they let a woman on the team, right?
Yeah,
And it's not as like underlined as it would be in a shittier movie, but it still is a moment like that, and it's kind of funny to be
yeah,
diversity win. Let's make that bomb. Like,
yeah. They say the next one will be dropped by a woman pilot.
oh yeah, that's a good one. I love that.
Yeah, that's fucking rough.
God, God bless America. The one last thing I guess I want to say about the production, I would recommend checking out the documentary, the final cut, which will give more details to a lot of these things. Um, that there's an incredible story about the release of the movie, where Chimino he shows up with the work print to show executives, right? They're rushing because they got to get it out by December for the Oscars, so they're rushing, and apparently like Chimino drove himself insane trying to edit this movie. Um, it, the executives come in, and Stephen Bach says okay. I talked to Michael, and I went, how close are we to a final cut? And Chimino goes, it's a little long. I think I can lose 15, 20 minutes. And they go, okay. And then they sit down and watch a movie that is nearly 5.5 hours long. According to Stephen Bach, in the work print, the battle scene alone was as long as some feature films. So he said that was the moment where he was like, he said at that moment he became very angry. He was because he was like he kind of realized watching it that it wasn't gonna be Apocalypse Now, right?
Mm-hmm.
That like this is what the fucking movie is, and this is what you show me after this. Um, and then they're like, you're not releasing a fucking 5 hour movie. You got to edit this shit down. Fucking do it. Like, and he drove himself insane. He released a 219-minute version of the movie, which is the one that premieres, plays for 1 week after getting savaged by some critics. Uh, Now, according to this documentary, I don't know how true it is, but according to this documentary, and everyone's very insistent on this, um, that it was Cimino's choice to pull the movie. That after those initial reviews, there's a story that might be apocryphal of the after party for the movie's release. People are kind of not happy, and Cimino apparently asked him, was like, "Why isn't anyone drinking and like having food? Like, what's going on?" And then someone said, "Because they hate your movie, Michael." And Jeff Bridges describes getting to the end of the movie and the audience doing the like slow like clap, like
Oh.
they just hear that clap, and uh, it's yeah, it's a little it didn't go very well. So Chimino then writes a letter to the UA. It's like, please, I like, and this is a time, like laser discs are just becoming a thing, but home video doesn't really exist. So this is a moment where like, if your film goes out of circulation, it could be gone forever, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's still that mentality of like, if this isn't protected, it could be gone. And I think he was desperate, being like, I want people to be able to see this movie that people like worked so hard on. He writes like an open letter, being like, please give me the chance to like fix this, and they do, but it backfires on them because first of all, like the artsy crowd thinks it's UA's decision, and so UA is like forcing this director to go back and edit it, and then everyone is like, well, if they're re-editing it, then they're admitting that they agree with the critics that it is terrible. That it turns what would have been like a weekend story about a movie flopping into a full-blown news event, and it turns into like it's not just being reported on like entertainment shows, it is being reported on like the regular news about a $40 million flop in Hollywood, that executives are panicking how much of a disaster it is. And this is that era, the early era of obsessive box office reporting,
Mm-hmm.
that now these movies aren't just movies, they're now news stories, and it's a big deal. People freak out. The edited version comes down. People are even more ready to hate it. They come down even harder on it. It basically makes everyone's worst of the year list. There's an amazing woman who I've never heard of, this critic in the documentary, who says that there is absolutely nothing good in Heaven's Gates. That even bad movies, there's something just that you can single out, and this movie has nothing. That there's not even one good performance that you can single out. Like that was like the attitude at the time, right?
Mm-hmm.
One critic, whose name I cannot remember off the top of my head, apologies, did give the edited version a more positive review and said, "We like now is the time to sit back and enjoy all that Michael Cimino has wrought," which is a great quote. It was Kevin Thomas of the Los Angeles Times. Um, like it called it a true screen epic and was very positive on it. And he later said that in his entire career as a critic, he never felt so totally alone, in an opinion. And he was so alone that his own paper brought in the former lead film critic to review Heaven's Gate and give it a negative review. So they didn't even lead with their official critic's review of the movie.
Fuck.
Yeah. So
That's fucking
it
shady.
yeah, it's fucked up.
And
Um,
just to fucking like doom spout a little bit, that does still happen nowadays.
oh,
Uh,
100%.
there's a great critic out there named Siddhanta Blaka. He also writes or co-writes a lot of Patrick Willem stuff, if not every video now. And he was reviewing, I believe, Falcon Winter Soldier or WandaVision or Loki, one of those Marvel shows, and he wasn't into it, and he was explaining why he thought it didn't work. Last 2 episodes of the season, suddenly there's a new critic on the beat.
Yeah.
It's
I
fucked
mean,
up.
it's fucked up, but that's what happens.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I mean, and so yeah, it gets savaged. It bombs. Transamerica not wanting their name attached to the studio any longer. sells United Artists to MGM. And now it is reported as the movie sank the studio. That's not entirely accurate. Transamerica is a multi-billion-dollar company, even in the early '80s. The money lost on Heaven's Gate was nothing but a blip to them, but they still sold it and were willing to sell out. Michael Cimino is the sole architect of the apocalypse. Um, I think Andy Olbrich was at Cannes when the announcement happened, and he gave an interview where he said, "This is what happens when you give too much control to the creative people." And Chris Christopherson has an amazing quote where he said, "I ran into him afterwards, and I said, 'Well, who are you going to give it to? The uncreative people?' And then he's like, 'Well, the uncreative people won.'" That's Chris Christopherson's quote. And Chris Christopherson, I could not find it, but it used to be on the Wikipedia. He had a much more damning quote where he said he straight up blamed Ronald Reagan for the movie not succeeding.
That's so fucking awesome.
He was like, "I think it was when Ronald Reagan took over, all these corporations were like, we don't make negative movies about America anymore. We make positive movies." And they came in and they made Heaven's Gate this scapegoat for that kind of thing. Now, I don't know how true that is, but I don't even if it was by sheer accident, that is certainly what the consequences were.
Mm-hmm.
This is arguably the end of the New Hollywood era and the beginning of the Reagan era of cinema, you could call it. I think our directors actually define, I mean, our presidents define our films a lot more than people tend to realize. So,
I'd completely agree with that.
yeah, so I think that's the beginning of this. And a big shift that happens. It's a shame. A lot of people, everyone basically got fired afterwards. Chris Christopherson's career doesn't really ever recover. This is kind of the tail end of Christopher Walken being a leading man. A lot of people's careers, I think, were set back by this movie. I think Brad Dourif was on the upswing at the time. It's kind of, he has a fine career, but it didn't pan out maybe the way they had hoped.
Mm-hmm.
Isabelle Huppert kind of has to retreat to Europe for a while. Yeah, and then it took forever, but eventually, it comes around. Now this edit's out there, and more people are kind of receptive to the movie. Cimino in like the '90s was doing some interview where he said, "I respond to Heaven's Gate the way J.F. Kennedy responded to the Bay of Pigs. I take full responsibility, and anything else, I think the film speaks for itself." And that's the quote that the documentary ends on, and I think that's a pretty good summation of what is going on here. So
yeah, you know what? That's a pretty honest, mature quote
yeah,
for this guy, I guess.
yeah. I think he was humbled by the experience, right? I think
Mm-hmm.
part of why he behaved the way he did during the production was he just assumed this movie was going to be like The Deer Hunter, another hit. He had just been told he was the greatest filmmaker of all time, right? Like it's hard to talk someone down when you tell someone they're a genius.
Yeah.
And I mean, how many of us, if everyone starts calling us geniuses, including our peers and maybe people who are our heroes, how many of us are going to be like, "No, I'm not." Like, so
Mm-hmm.
you're going to start to believe it a little bit,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Again, shout out. I brought it up before, but shout out to Jordan Peele for when someone was like, "Jordan Peele has the greatest run of any horror director." He shut that down immediately. He's like, "Don't do that to me, please," because
Yeah,
he knows what comes next.
yeah.
You know.
He knows the arc of these directors.
Yeah.
He should almost make a bad movie next just to be safe, just to like
Yeah.
get
I
over
know.
it.
Just to cover all his bases.
Yeah.
I've been too good. I've been on a hot streak. I need to fuck something up really quick.
But yeah, so that's essentially the production history, which often overshadows the film itself.
Yeah.
So now we can talk about the actual movie.
It's good.
Yes, it is.
The end. No. I will be completely honest. That what is it, like 20 minutes roughly, the opening graduation sequence, right?
Yes, it's very.
It's very long. I loved the way it looked. I kind of had a feeling in my stomach. I was like, "Ooh, this is going on for a while." I don't know if it needs to. I'm fine with it now, having seen two versions of it. But there was definitely that pit in my stomach. I think I've talked about it before. For sometimes a movie I even enjoy, I feel like I get off on the wrong foot with it, and I'm not ever entirely sure why. This one I knew immediately is just too long. Like it just is. Like I
Well, it's
think that's
also
fair
like
to say.
with an opening like this, you start going like, how much of this is gonna? If you don't know what's coming, you're like, how much of this is gonna be relevant later, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, are we watching a western? Like,
Yeah.
what are the significances we're supposed to be taking away from this? I'll say this on rewatch, um, that the prologue at Harvard. By the way, Harvard refused to let them film there. By the way,
Oh yeah, they filmed at Oxford, right?
yeah. So why not? Yeah, go fuck yourself with your historical accuracy shit. You shot at a completely different college.
I know.
No one cares. Like, um, but the opening of this movie is quietly incredibly devastating.
No, it is.
Especially on rewatch where it's just like the weird, like it's not just the, like they're young and hopeful, right? Like it's not just that. It's the they're all about to graduate, they're about to go out into the world, but also part of John Hurt's whole speech is like the head of the class, right? Like, and a big part of his thing is like we're gonna do things different. We're not gonna make the same mistakes of the past generation, and it's very sad to watch.
It
Uh,
is.
Not just
Uh,
because of the violent conflict that is to come, but just in the general sense of like they're going to fight against something that they're just not going to be able to beat, you know?
mhm.
And when you cut 20 years later, they have both assimilated into the system in their own way. Um, and, Chris Christopherson has he's basically become like a sort of lawman. What is he officially?
I think he's a marshal. He's
Yeah,
the marshal of the
of
town.
Johnson County.
Yeah,
Uh,
I keep fucking forgetting the name. Thank you.
I only know it because it's just the Johnson County War. They barely say it in the movie. Um, and His buddy John Hurt's character has basically given up. Right, like by this
Hmm.
point in the movie, he's a drunk. He's all his ideals have gone away. He's a part of the Wyoming Stock Growers Association, which are straight up planning to murder immigrants, which is what
Hmm.
their plan is. And uh, It felt oddly relevant watching it,
Hmm.
that these guys who are rich, who are essentially kind of their big beef is that they are saying the immigrants are stealing their cattle, right? That is essentially the beef, which isn't untrue. We do see that like cattle is being stolen, but these people are so rich they can afford to have some cattle go away and not be hurt, right?
Hmm.
And it's this thing of like they are valuing property higher than human lives because essentially because they're immigrants. And you know what image kept popping into my head? Because also a big thing about this is Sam Waterston, who was the head of the Stock Growers Association.
Hmm.
Um, he's the villain of the movie essentially. Uh, he he's never been in like none of these guys have really been in real battle, right? Like they have one guy in the group that is officially like a military dude, right? And a lot of
Yeah.
them are just kind of weekend warrior types or like mercenaries, like Christopher Walken's character. And remember when the Black Lives Matter protests were happening, and there was that image that went around of like a middle-aged guy, white guy, and his wife, and they're both on their front lawns with like one of them has like an automatic weapon and
Yeah.
gun just because protesters were going by their house.
Yeah.
Like that's the image I just had in my head watching this again. Like that's like the entire vibe of these people, right? Of just like
Yeah. Unfortunately, that's very fucking
yeah,
relevant to this.
they are looking for this excuse to gun these people
Hmm.
down, right? And now they finally have it, and they're going to do it. Um, I say it's a quietly scary. There's a lot, like I say, it's like very understated a lot for me anyway. For a movie that wears its themes on its sleeve, like it's not a
Hmm.
subtle film, but the more devastating stuff is uh, Christopherson arriving back in Casper on his way to Johnson County. Um, and like there's a sudden influx of like there's immigrants, but he's kind of gotten used to that, and now there's all this influx of like other people, and he goes to the general store and he sees everyone buying up guns, and he starts putting together what's going on, right? That these people are gearing up for a conflict, uh,
Yeah.
that it's all these people. And before he goes into the store, he sees that immigrant and her husband are being attacked. He doesn't do anything about it. When he leaves the store, he moves to stop it. The husband has unfortunately been beaten to death by this point, and the wife is on her own, and now is basically being left to sell the land with her children all by themselves. And it's this really tragic cycle in American history of just like we get the poor and immigrants to like build this nation, then we come in and kill them and take it from them, right? Like that's
Hmm.
so what's happening here. Um, Down to the inclusion of all the sex workers, which is that is a big thing of like sex workers. They are constantly one of the they sex workers are bigger pioneers than fucking people who like who claim to be pioneers, right? Like
Yeah.
they go out to these new territories, they found it, and then once quote unquote civilization arrives, they get thrown out. You know?
Yeah, like because sex is
Yeah,
dirty, man. We can't
it's
have talks of that. We can't allow that to happen, especially if someone's making a living off it that's maybe on their own
yeah,
terms, you know,
yeah. I mean, it's how it.
where they're able to have more agency over their own like
I mean,
autonomy.
we see that.
Not always. That's also important to
No,
know, but you know.
it's like any it's here's the thing about fucking just I'm just gonna say it as quick as possible. The whole morality debate about the sex industry and sex work entirely misses the point that it is a labor issue and that sex workers are workers and they deserve the protection that other workers are afforded. And that includes, protection to not be exploited, right? Like there should be unions of sex workers. It shouldn't be this thing that has to happen in the dark. And then that's where they get, they're vulnerable. That's where they get taken advantage of because they have to operate outside the law. And you have to, who do you go to if something happens to you? You can't go to the police because you'll get arrested. And half the time, the police are the one committing the crimes. So that's my little rant right there. But
No, it's a good
this
one.
is, I mean,
It's a good
this
one.
is a theme that goes back to even like Stagecoach. Like one of the women that has to leave the town on the stagecoach in that movie is I don't think they call her a sex worker in the movie, but she's a coded sex worker. And now we are living through
Hmm.
that right now with the internet, where what was the internet was so associated with pornography in its initial founding that was all people thought it was good for the longest time, right?
Yeah.
Pornography and sex work essentially built the internet more than fucking any of these tech bros, and now they're all being systematically thrown out of every website, right? Like even the
Hmm.
frontier we made up, we're doing it. It's fucking tragic in its own way. Um, but uh, yeah, so it's the sex work isn't just in this movie just to get Isabelle Huppert naked, although the movie finds a lot of excuses to get Isabelle Huppert naked.
Oh no, it
Yeah.
does. It does.
It's one of those things where whenever someone's like, "I made this historically accurate," and then there's naked women with like immaculate skin, I'm just like, "Yeah, yeah, buddy, yeah, and just fucking, just be honest with me, man. Like, don't fucking lie to me about this shit." Uh, but I think that's this thing of like we mistake so many moral issues in this country, and I think that goes back to our discussion of like sort of reductive criticisms of movies, with which often gets boiled down to a movie's morality or what art you consume as being a moral thing, and we forget that these are often labor issues at the heart of it, right?
Hmm.
And as we are recording, the strike is still going on, although it feels like it could wrap up any moment now, honestly. It's starting to feel like the studios are getting a little more nervous now. Everyone's got their dick out, so they're not going to just shut
Yeah.
it down overnight. But
Yeah, and I mean to be fair, I think the studios knew they had a losing battle like at least 70 days in.
yeah,
It's just like they just, fucking they also planted a flag and we're like, "No, we're going to whip out our bigger dick
yeah,
and we're going to show them that, they can't beat us." And it's like, "Well, we can.
yeah.
We are."
I think
So,
they're all. It's really about how do they save face when they lose, right? Like what it's come down to.
yeah.
And then
Oh,
I wonder who's
100%.
going to be the last one to like give in. Like who's going to be the one that's like right now is like no, we're never surrendering because there's one of the executives is like that.
Yeah, I have my thoughts, but I do want to work in the industry, so I won't say anymore.
We've already
I,
said way too much.
I think Netflix then. I think it'll be
You got
Netflix.
nothing to worry about. Netflix isn't going to be here in 10 years. You are
Yeah.
fine. That is the least one to be worried about.
Yeah, my second choice was Bob
Yeah,
Iger.
yeah, Bob Iger makes a lot of sense. Although he was kind of the first one coming out being like, he said that thing where he's like, I think they're being unreasonable, and then like a week later being like, you know what, I was a little harsh. So
No, he hasn't said a word since that interview. They were like, "You know what, man?
yeah,
Don't talk
I,
for the
I,
rest of the
I think
strike."
he knew enough at least to be like,
Yeah.
I think the fucked up thing is I think he meant it when he said he thought writers were being unreasonable. Like I don't think that was any
Yeah.
sort of tactic. I think he meant that, which is somehow more embarrassing. But now I think he's like, okay, maybe I'll just stay quiet for a little
Yeah.
bit.
And then
Um,
Zaslav's in the corner, like who is fucking up too. Like if he's not the number 2 choice, he's the number 3 choice.
Zaslav, Zaslav, I think, understands that his standing in the culture is so bad right now that he could come out and be like, "We're giving the writers all their demands," and he would still get booed. Like,
Yeah, and then we'd be like, then give them more, you motherfucker, throwing apples and tomatoes at his fucking head.
essentially, yeah, he is an unfortunate figure in the film industry right now. Uh,
Unfortunate figure on planet
I
Earth,
guess you're
perhaps,
right.
but
Yeah.
that's neither here nor there
But
right
that's the thing.
now.
That's why labor is so important because it's actually the answer to things. Any issue you think, anytime you're boiling stuff down, be like, what is the morality of this? If you're not considering the labor aspect, you're completely missing the point, right? And that
Yeah.
also crosses over with disability rights, but that's a whole other thing. Um, so those things are wildly important because they touch everything, and they're the two things we don't want to talk about. Uh, it is thankfully, I believe, shifted on labor. I think now you see a younger generation coming up being like, "Fuck yeah, labor," which is kind of funny to see. Uh, I
Mm-hmm.
think the disability thing will get here, but it will be for unfortunate reasons, as some people have lingering effects from the COVID outbreak. Uh, so
Yeah.
we're gonna have to get serious about disability rights in the next few years, or bring eugenics back. Those are gonna be the two
Don't
options.
do that
I
one.
not, I
Don't.
am definitely not saying do that one.
No, no, no. I know you're not.
I'm saying those are gonna be the two options ahead of us. We either destroy the planet or give workers their rights, or we bring eugenics back, or we help take care of the disabled. Those are our two options going
Well, what
forward.
makes us more money in the long run?
Yeah, fucking morons everywhere. Um, but so yeah, it's like I said, these are like two extended sequences. Everything we just described is like the first hour of this movie, right? The only other
Yeah.
notable
Yeah.
thing is Christopher Walken gunning down that guy.
Yeah. Which is shot wonderfully and tragically. I really love the image of him through the.
No, it's an amazing introduction for a character. Yeah. Feels like it should be like more memorable, but again, I think because of the movie's reputation, it hasn't taken a hold in that way yet.
Yeah.
Maybe it will in the future.
Yeah, but I think I also love it too because like we're talking about the opening scene, which I'll be honest, it's a little long. I think it's my favorite scene in the movie. Which is I don't know if that's a hot take, but to go like talk about the ideas present in the like introduction of these character scenes, Walken goes through a pretty big change throughout the movie, right?
Yeah.
And so the idea that he's just a hired gun at the kind of start of this, and he's doling out like
Mhm.
he's executing people. There's no two ways about
Yeah,
it.
he's being paid to kill the immigrants that are accused of stealing cattle,
Hmm.
which is there's a lot of mercenaries that have been hired by this Wyoming Stock Growers Association.
Yeah, and
Um,
and he is
and
his
this is a
job,
conflict. Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And so like his introduction, you don't even see his face. It's just the outline of a man. Like it's like there's not a whole person there yet, which I just really liked.
No, it's great. And then, but he's also like he's revealed to be like he's very bigoted against the immigrants, right? Like he tells them to go back where they came from.
Hmm.
He goes for an arc. There's a weird love triangle at the heart of this movie. Um, how do you feel about that, Diego?
Uh, I genuinely was like, it was struggle. It was a struggle. I was like, am I gonna like not vibe with this? But I guess because it's so like thematically relevant, I could like live with it. It served the narrative purpose it was supposed to, and I do think the actors do have good chemistry together.
They both
You
Chris
know.
Christopherson and Walken both love Isabelle Huppert, right?
Hmm.
Like, and she's the sex worker. Her name is one of the people on the list of people that will be killed. That's a big thing about this list, right? Like that's a big central point of
Yeah.
like who's actually on the list. Turns out everyone. But and it's this thing of Chris Christopherson. His whole thing, he's basically given up. He's like, we should just leave. He's like, let's just get out of here. Let's like we can afford to leave, and I'll like we can leave all this stuff behind. And she's like, I don't want to leave. Like I like being here. And Walken is in love with her as well. And even though he's been hired to kill immigrants, he can't like tell her that's what's going to happen, right? Like
Yeah.
he's kind of keeping it from her, and it's this interesting. I mean, they're both him and Christopherson are both kind of behaving that way, where they're trying to keep it as long as possible. Christopherson kind of admits it sooner, but it's interesting.
It is.
Um,
Uh,
very very depressing.
It's super depressing. Living in this country is depressing, and I got two things I want to bring up. One is the image of Ella and or Chris Christopherson and Isabelle Huppert, when he's asking her to, like, get out of here, like leave, like fuck all this. It's against they're silhouetted as well against like that kind of shimmering lake area with the
Yeah.
valley. Like that's a fucking painting right there, basically. Um, and much like Walken's opening, where he's like, that's not like a person yet. This is kind of like it's the idyllic version of
It,
like the American dream. It's like, let's just get out of here, let's live our lives together, and it's
yeah,
just
they're
like it's
essentially.
not real, unfortunately. Here,
I mean, well, yeah, it's like it's not real, but he is. The idea is like he's found his own like little Eden, right? Like
yeah,
this is. I mean, she's running around naked, very thematic to have your actress naked.
yeah.
Um, I'm just
No,
being a
no,
bit of.
it's yeah, it is clearly directed by
It,
a guy,
it's
a man.
it's New Hollywood. It's fucking
Yeah.
New Hollywood, man. Like that's what it is. I was surprised there's some slight gay subtext in this movie, which I didn't remember especially between Hurt and Christopherson.
Hmm.
Early on where they're having the big party and Christopherson's kind of with his college girlfriend, and Hurt seems way more interested in his buddy Chris Christopherson than any of the women around. Or maybe
Uh-huh.
that day. So you can't do a historic epic without gay subtext. I'm just letting anyone know that you're not
No,
going to make a good.
that's true. That's true.
So, but yeah, it's this own little patch of Eden they sort of have, and he's kind of in denial that like it's coming to an end, right?
Hmm.
That it's just no matter what they do, it's coming to an end, and he's paralyzed as whether or not to act. Like his solution is to just leave, and so he's like he's either leaving this behind, but she wants to stay, and he knows that staying, A, it could mean she dies, and B, it means they're gonna have to fight for it. Like
Hmm.
it's one of the conflicts of the movie.
Yeah. The second thing I wanted to bring up, I almost forgot this, but I think it's really important that you brought up the fact that, like, if you're unhappy here, leave. That is a still very recurring statement said to immigrants today. It's a
Yeah,
statement, even people who are generally not like anti-immigration. If you say you're unhappy with America, they're like, well, we could just move somewhere else, and it's like you can't. Like it doesn't work that way. Um, but it's such a common sentiment, and it's a very privileged sentiment.
yeah.
Because even
I mean,
apart
the
from those two
movie
things,
equalizes.
do you like why should someone have to move from the home that they've come to love? Like if you don't, like if you genuinely can and you don't want to live here, wherever that is in the United States of America, like I encourage that. If you could find somewhere else you're happier, like
Yeah,
I wish the best for you, and I do encourage that. But it's such a
it's
privileged notion to just be like, well,
it's
then
not a
just move.
it's not a blanket answer. I mean,
Yeah.
it's as dumb as fucking what's that fucker's name? Ben Shapiro being like, "Well, we don't have to worry about global warming because the people who live on the coast will just move their houses."
Yeah,
Like,
and like
it's as dumb as that.
it
Like,
is. Because even if
it's
you ran through that Ben Shapiro statement, you're like, let's say you're some fucking moron who's like, yeah, just sell your house, I'll do that, right? That doesn't solve anything.
yeah, it
It
doesn't.
literally solves nothing. It solves less things. It's negative solving.
And a lot of this is about the frontier, so it is kind of about like people who are trying to leave something behind, right?
Hmm.
Like immigrants are leaving like chaos in their own countries. There was a lot of issues over there at the time in Eastern Europe. Like a lot of them, when the list of names comes out, some of the older women aren't exactly shocked by it because
Hmm.
it's implied they have lived through such things before. It's very. I mean, that is what the West is somehow that we can kind of leave this behind, this sort of march of civilization, and also that we can wash our hands of what it takes to kind of build the world we live in, and that some people just don't, and then there are other people who just don't give a shit. Like they're just like, yeah, it's all worth it because we get to found America, and it pays no consideration to the people who actually have to build the country and the consequences of it, right?
Hmm.
It's it's a recurring thing. It's just something I think about all the time now. Is just how many people, even people I agree with, who seem to have no consideration of who actually has to build the world we live in.
Yeah.
Um, but it's pretty like these are like a lot of what we're talking about are like insanely long sequences of her like they buy her the cart, right? Like there's that she goes out riding, some fun stuff. There's the roller skating party that happens.
Oh yeah,
Uh,
yeah, yeah, yeah. I like that.
David Mansfield, the composer for the movie, appearing in the film as the what is it? He's the violin player. That character kind of recurs throughout it.
Mm.
I will say, it's very good at like at least visually establishing certain members of the immigrant community. So like as the story goes on, as the conflicts kind of increase, even if we don't know their names, we recognize the people who are participating in the battle, right?
Yeah,
Like,
they're not faceless, even if they're literally, some of them are nameless, you know?
yeah. So, um, I
And I
guess
think
we,
that's, I just want to say, I think that's also an extension of Chimino's, like, strength, where it's like, maybe, like, on the page, this is pretty fucking unwieldy, and, like, I don't know what to make of this, but
yeah,
when he has to hone it down into, like a sequence, like, you do feel the people in this movie. You do feel the world around them. It's not a movie that you just kind of like forget about. Even if you
mhm,
don't like this movie, I don't see how anyone can kind of just be flippant about it, I guess.
yeah,
Like there's too much here to just write it off as forgettable or a disaster.
yeah. I think some people would just maybe like brush up. I mean, there is the like just inherent conflict of like this egomaniac spending like the bank to make a movie about how the poor are taken advantage of, and then like to be like
Yeah, I know, yeah.
like there's that inherent conflict with the movie that I get to see some people brushing up against. There's also just I think there's a lot of staples of New Hollywood that just in most New Hollywood movies haven't aged well that are in this, you know.
Hmm.
And one of them being the like we're gonna get graphic about like violence and shit
Yeah.
like that. And I mean there is a very intense rape scene in this movie
Hmm.
with Isabelle Huppert's character. It's a pretty upsetting sequence. Now it's meant to be, so I'm not like sitting here being like, how dare they? But it's also like we've our discussions and depictions of rape in cinema have evolved a lot since then. So that's some of the stuff that hasn't
Yeah.
aged as well. Um, so see, how was it feeling seeing Tom Noonan pop up in this fucking thing?
He's the greatest.
Yeah, not in this movie.
Oh. Not in this movie. No, not in this movie.
Diego was just saying
So
everything Tom Noonan does is fine and cool.
no, no.
Yeah, I'm
Um,
joking.
no, of course not. But yeah, I think that's also important to mention. Like, I would go into this one with a trigger warning
Yeah,
for that,
no, yeah,
for the rape scene.
it's a pretty
Yeah,
brutal one. I mean,
yeah,
and, yeah, that was something. That was kind of a newer thing. So it was like we're demystifying this stuff, but you know, a lot of those people. I mean, I had that list I sent I read earlier of all the filmmakers that were criticizing the choices being made over at United Artists when the
hmm,
you should. Um, I don't know if you noticed Diego, but they were all men.
yeah,
Hollywood, as much as film bros love sucking New Hollywood's dick because it did give unprecedented freedom to new filmmakers, it seemed to only give it to a certain class of filmmakers, unfortunately.
hmm,
Um, and even
uh,
even the French New Wave
yeah,
kind of didn't do only gave it to like Agnes Varda and shit. Like
yeah. And she kind of really had to position herself like constantly.
yeah.
She was a fucking
But
like
if here's the
pathfinder.
thing, if there's an old lady in Hollywood, if you see like an old lady, not even just Hollywood, but there's an old lady who like clearly doesn't give a fuck anymore and is just being as goofy as possible in their old age, as Agnes Varda was doing. I was like, that woman went through hell just to be that goofy.
Yeah.
That woman worked their ass off to get to the position where they can now be like this goofy figure and like have fun, you know? And
Hmm.
that's the point.
Yeah.
They're like, I've got as far as I can in this life. I can relax a little bit now, and now I don't give a shit because I've had worse things said to me than anyone can say. So she's the strongest
Yeah.
person in the room. Agnes Varda was the
Yeah.
strongest person at that Oscar lineup when it was just her cardboard cutout.
Yeah. Uh, rest in peace, Agnes Varda.
uh, but uh, yeah, so there's some of that. We can just kind of we don't have to go through the whole movie, I guess. Unless is there anything specifically you want to talk about? I think you want to talk about Walken's kind of arc as a character.
Yeah, because it's like this is the real revelation, and finally sitting down to watch this entire movie is that like it's very dense thematically. Like the narrative is pretty fucking simple, and I think that's what we're discovering with these failed blockbusters recently. Is like they're either told in a very convoluted fashion, or there's a bunch of like extraneous circumstances, not about the movie itself, but maybe the production or
Yeah,
its place in history, where people respond so negatively to them. The narratives tend not to be that like
It's
convoluted.
honestly,
It's pretty
it's my
straightforward.
favorite type of movie, honestly. Like where the narrative itself is very straightforward, but it's told not very straightforwardly. Like
Mhm.
you might notice a recurring thing of me being attracted to those type of movies, including
Yeah,
Final
yeah,
Fantasy: The Spirits Within. Apparently,
yeah. You are the guy. You and Ebert.
me and Ebert did not
Yeah.
like this movie. So think about that.
No,
Positive review to
no.
Spirits Within, not Heaven's Gate. But hey, what are you gonna do?
Yeah.
There's
Um.
it's I don't know, it's just it is the type of movie I love. I mean, it's fucking like Good, the Bad, and the Ugly is like a treasure hunt movie, but it's 3 hours long. Like
Mhm.
so, yeah.
Excuse me. Yeah, to Walken's character, yeah, I just really loved like the arc of a guy like learning just how shitty the world is around him after like basically
It's
committing his life to it.
complicity in it, right? Like
Yeah.
there's that he is a huge part of it. And
Yeah, and I mean maybe I respond to that so much because I feel like at the end of the day, there are two types of people in this world. There are those that recognize, oh, everything is interconnected and like most actions will have consequences that I will not see the reverberations to, right? And other people are like, yeah, this is just about me, and they'll never really take responsibility for their actions
this is
ever. So I really like seeing it in
this is
film.
about me, and
It's a
anything that's happening out in the world has nothing to do with me. That I in
yes,
no way have any part in anything that's going on out in the world. And yeah, there are some people that just can't get outside of that bubble, and they die that way. And
yeah. I mean that. I mean I've seen the shift for more conservative people as they're raising families. They're like, well, I just got to take care of my family, and then that like leads into like, well, there's a homeless problem. I don't care. Just put them somewhere else. I don't have the bandwidth to deal with this, and it's like that's you've got to raise a family. That's fine.
that's the
But
good
then they
version
keep
of it, frankly. Like there's some people.
it yeah, but I've seen it fucking nosedive very quickly after that, where it's like just put them in
Yeah,
camps, and it's like what, what do you mean by that? And I know what they mean by that, and it's never a good thing.
no,
Um, or like it's like oh I don't care about these problems that women have or whatever. I don't care about like we don't need any more immigrants in this country. I can barely hold a job down enough as it is. Like that kind of
mhm.
shit that is also present in this movie. Uh, and it's just it's very unfortunate that it is still
Yeah.
relevant today,
It's
I
just one of these
guess.
things. It's just society. Like it's never going to be an unalloyed society where we don't have these sort of problems, right? Like I'm
Yeah.
honestly like that's I know it's like that might sound like a dreadful thing or like a dreadful take, right? But I am comfortable with that. I think the bigger problem is our inability to accept that, right? That there's inability
Hmm.
to accept that there's no perfect society that like even with anything we gain, there's always going to be a reaction to it that pushes us back a little bit, and it's
Hmm.
about making those pushbacks as small as possible. And if you expect us to get to a finish line somewhere, it's just not gonna happen. You're gonna end up really bitter, and I'm fine with that, like accepting that. But I think people want the perfect society, and I think conservatives are a little better at pitching a perfect society because their idea of a perfect society is one where you only have to worry about yourself, right? Like it's one where it's just you and your family and no one else. So you don't have to think about larger systematic issues because
Hmm.
those a lot of the systematic issues don't have obvious or immediate solutions, and they will, even when we fix it, it's always at risk of falling back apart if we don't take care of it well enough. I mean, that is 100% what we are living through right now, where the gains of the civil rights era are now being undone by a Christian nationalist Supreme Court, right? Like we are, it's
Hmm.
100% what we were living through because we didn't take care. We treated those victories as a finish line that they never were. That we have to constantly be vigilant, and that's
I mean, to even make it like more immediate, uh, how we handled COVID
yes,
19, right? Like it's like okay, the pandemic is officially over as of like was it May 2022 or whatever the
sure,
fuck, which was not true, which is a statement made that is factually incorrect because I just had 3 friends get COVID, some of them one of them for the first time. So, Not true. They're
Yeah.
okay. They're fine right now. But they got it, and they're not. They could be better. Is what I'm saying. It's better to not have COVID. Um, and that's just you have to solve problems by like not just making them go away
Yeah.
immediately.
Well,
You got to think long term. Like, how do you stop it from popping back
I
up?
don't like this phrase because there are people who are like, well, there's, we're just going to have to make COVID a part of our lives. But when people say that, they're meaning like we're not actually going to do anything to solve COVID, right? Like there are steps we could be taking
Yeah.
that would help a lot of people. Now, I do unfortunately believe that COVID is just going to hang around, but it definitely doesn't need to be hanging around on the level that it is right now. I think we could get back to a point where you genuinely don't have to worry about wearing a mask everywhere you go. I think we could easily get there if we tried, but we're no longer trying, and that is a
Hmm.
problem. But yeah, that's a more
Yeah.
immediate thing. And again, we are living in what 100 years ago would be considered a miracle era in terms of how we deal with medicine, right? Like vaccine
Hmm.
stuff, and because of that, but because we became so comfortable with it, it allowed the sort of reactionary, well, we don't need vaccines thing to kind of move in, you know.
Hmm.
It's we
Yeah.
haven't had a pandemic in so long. We no longer remember why we even valued vaccines. And what's interesting about now is though that the disinformation about vaccines never existed on the scale it does right now. So it's interesting to see what's going to happen if pandemics continue and the need for vaccines becomes more and more apparent. If we what will we go back? That's it's more of a fascinating thing than anything else, if at all very troubling. Um, but yeah,
I mean, to end that little not tangent, but that little discussion, to end it on a positive note. Like, I think it was like polio or something. Some like New York hospital reported a case of some virus or disease that was um, thought to be like been completely eradicated, and it popped up, and it was very
mm,
contagious. And then like almost immediately we stopped hearing about it, and like because it just went away. That's because enough people have been vaccinated with enough stuff to have stopped the spread of stuff like that. Like, remember monkeypox? Everyone was like, "Oh shit, is that the next thing?" And it's like, well, no, because people ended up being vaccinated with enough stuff to
mm,
stop the spread of it. And it's like, maybe not everyone's gonna be on board with facts and science, but maybe enough that we're gonna be all right,
it
anyways.
is important.
Doesn't mean we
Yeah,
can't do
it's important
more.
to note that a
Doesn't
lot of
mean
the
that.
anti-vax people have all already been vaccinated. Like they were vaccinated as children.
Hmm.
Now it's this weird push of like we don't have to vaccinate our children anymore, and how will that affect society? That that is the big question.
Yeah,
I don't
yeah.
know. I don't know. I'm not
No.
optimistic or pessimistic about it. It's just something to keep an eye on.
Hmm.
But yeah, we see like, and this movie is pretty like on the nose about like it's pretty direct of like no like they're I mean you hear this talk where it's like they're coming to end the anarchy in Johnson County, right? And now this movie's pretty one sided where it portrays immigrants as sort of like just happy people, like with
Hmm.
struggles. Heaven's Gate, which is like the name of the community place. That's where the title of the movie comes from. Uh, the That's where they have the roller skating party is at Heaven's Gate, right?
Yeah, yeah.
It's so it's a little one-sided, but when you hear about these people being like we have to stop the anarchy, we have to stop all this, it feels very similar to how we talk about crime these days, and no one actually thinking about what causes crime and shit like that, and how to like what are the solutions, and it's just like what if we just send a bunch of people in with guns to settle things, and then we're all shocked when it ends in
Hmm.
violence. And it's very much also a movie about Vietnam. I mean, his last movie was The Deer Hunter, which is about Vietnam, and this is very much a movie about like what we do in Vietnam is just what we've done to our own country, but are now exporting to the world, right? Like the sort of imperialism we've been
Hmm.
doing it here forever, and that like the extension. I mean, it's very telling that the mercenaries are the ones that go and murder and rape all the women at the brothel. Uh,
Hmm.
it's very much something that is just it happens during war because we treat certain people we treat the enemy as subhuman. It's
Yeah.
it's an awful thing. Um, but yeah, it's really what you're gonna have to put up with is like the length and kind of the harshness of it, uh, We get to the final
Mhm.
battle, and that battle's like an hour long, and it's just pure chaos. Like we're like,
Yeah.
I'm not shocked that animals died making this. I am shocked that no human beings died filming that battle. Because also, they're not all stunt performers, and a lot of them are just extras. They just throw on horses and then like, okay, charge. Do that over and
Mhm.
over again for weeks.
Yeah. By the way, don't do that.
Don't
Anyone
no
ever?
no no never
Yeah,
do that.
don't do that.
Also, maybe don't pick the one location you approve for the battle. Maybe don't pick it 2 hours away from the nearest hotel. So it's a 2 hour drive there every morning and 2 hours back. And basically everyone went insane trying to shoot the battle. Uh,
Yeah, I think Chimino and like his group, they scoured through like tens of thousands of miles of land to like find like appropriate stuff. You go through that much land, I feel like maybe you could have picked a safer spot and still made it look like interesting,
yeah,
you know?
I think I picked it because it's like
But
there's
hey,
the mountains there. There's this clearing. There's the mountains. There's the woods, and there's the river right there. I think that's the reason why he picked it. He probably couldn't find, in his mind, a location that could contain all three of those things, right? Like,
hmm
but hey, um, Brad Dourif is pretty excellent in this movie, even though he's a very minor
yeah,
character. Um,
very minor, but great performance.
Mr.
I mean, he's just fantastic.
Mr. Eggleston, who he's the one who kind of riles everyone up. He gives his speech, which is what like basically leads to the conflict. And an ultimate tragedy. On his way there, he crashes the cart, and his wife dies before the battle even begins. And then he's later shot. It's very brutal. The whole battle sequence is very brutal. It doesn't end on a happy note. The military just comes in and puts an end to it. Be like, okay, everyone go home now. And uh, a woman shoots herself in the head, which is a little unnecessary, but
Yeah.
uh, you know, shit, shit goes down. Um,
Yeah, I mean, it's very miserable by the end.
yes, it's a very
Like
miserable.
it's
And then
yeah,
like
it's ultimately a tragedy.
yeah, and then you're like, and then just to get to the very ending, you go like, well, all right, it's over, and then everyone just gets shot. Like
Yeah,
the only one who lives is Christopherson. Like everyone dies.
yeah,
I'm
yeah,
looking at the list of characters. I'm pretty sure everyone's dead by the end of the movie, save Joseph Cotton, who's only in the opening. I believe this was Joseph Cotton's last movie. Uh,
Oh wow.
he might have done some like voiceover work after, but I think he was finishing up actually being in films. Um, but yeah, and the only other one is Christopherson and the his college girlfriend who he ends up with in the epilogue, which is a
Yeah.
pretty brutal ending for the movie. That he's literally adrift at sea. He's living on a boat. He's living in Rhode Island, and he's tried to detach himself from America as much as possible, but is still ultimately tethered to it.
Yeah, and that tethered back to that opening sequence where they're like, "Oh, we got our whole lives ahead of us. We're gonna, everything's gonna change for the better, whatever." And it's like, no, well, you're back to where you started, but now they're alone.
Yeah, you're back to where you
They're
started,
alone.
and your life is actively worse. Like, and
Yeah, they're alone. They're surrounded by gaudy objects.
yeah,
Like just
it's a,
like they're very well off financially, clearly, but
it's a very clearly
it doesn't matter.
loveless marriage.
Yeah.
I could not help my father and I, because this is what we do when we watch movies. There is the shot of him on the boat, and there's a fireplace on a boat, which doesn't seem like the smartest idea, but hey. Um,
I know.
and he comes in, his wife wakes up, and she looks at him. She's like, I could really use a cigarette. And they cut to the reaction shot from Christopherson. They just hold on him for a second, and it's just one of these things where like there's so much contempt in his face for where his life has ended up. We just couldn't help but laugh a little bit.
Yeah.
It was a little brutal. Yeah,
Well, this is a minor note. The I guess blue screen shot or the compositing shot of him
there's like
walking away
one.
from the sunset is fucking awful.
Yeah, it.
That is not the takeaway you should have from this movie. But it's just the one part of the movie where I'm like, that looks
Yeah,
bad because the rest of the movie looks so good.
makes me wonder what happened there because so much of the rest of the movie doesn't have any of that. So like, I wonder why they needed it for that shot. Um,
Yeah, I don't know.
but who knows? That was
Uh,
probably one of the last things they shot after all the money was spent.
yeah,
But
yeah.
yeah, it's a fucking John Hurt just gets shot, right? Like he gets shot in the throat, right?
Mm.
Um, Going, God, I miss Paris. That's how I plan to go out. Just drink,
Oh yeah, that's pretty good.
remembering my journey to Paris that never actually happened. Um, shot.
No, see, I want to go the way of the great red fox. I'm coming, Elizabeth.
God damn.
I've never dated an Elizabeth. I don't think I know any Elizabeths in my immediate circle, but I'm just gonna say that and confuse everyone.
You should get something in heaven if you manage to make your last words, I'm coming, Elizabeth. You've
Yeah.
managed to.
Red Fox is like, all right, he high fives me on the way up. Hell yeah.
That's it. You just get a high five from Red Fox.
Hey, you know what?
It's very.
A high five from the great Red Fox is worth more than the treasure of the Sierra Madre.
Mickey Rourke's also in this movie.
Yeah, he is. This is like his first
Yeah,
thing,
very
right?
minor role. Uh,
And Mickey Rourke and Willem Dafoe, who's not
well,
credited,
because
but
he was
he's
fired a day in the filming.
oh,
There's
never
a
mind.
funny. He lied about being able to speak whatever the language is, um, the Slavic language, to get on the set. Like he lied, and then they realized the day in, so he got fired. But funny thing is, so like he
Well,
talks about that in one of his like career retrospectives they did, like for Variety or Vanity Fair or whatever the fuck that they do on YouTube. He tells that story. The other funny thing is he narrates the documentary, The Final Cut, about Heaven's Gate. So he's still involved.
so he gets the last
In a
laugh.
weird way, he kind of does.
Yeah, take that, Michael
But that
Cimino.
documentary is very much like a we should give Heaven's Gate a break type documentary. So,
Aw.
but yeah, Defoe. You believe it or not, you can tell it's Defoe. It's not like you're like, oh my god, is that Willem Dafoe? It's like, nope, that is 100% Willem Dafoe. But yeah, very brutal movie. Um,
Yeah. I guess if I have some other notes just about like the reworkings of the film for
yes.
the Soderbergh cut, it cuts the final moment we were just talking about on the boat in the future in 1903, I believe, right? That's the final
Yeah.
sequence. Yeah. It ends after, I believe, after Walken dies.
What?
And then it flashes. Did I? Let me go back to it really quick. Yeah, on the battlefield.
Walken dies
Oh, who
before
did
the
he get
battle
there?
even begins.
No. So it's Christopherson looking off at
Oh, is that
at
shot of him
the remnants of that.
wandering away? Like, there's that.
Yeah, and then it cuts back to the opening because you don't see the opening in the initial version of the Soderbergh butcher's cut. He's already in around Heaven's Gate, the county, the Johnson County. Fucking there we go. Now I remembered it
He
finally.
starts
Um,
the story in Johnson County.
yes, and then the final sequence is the opening where they're all optimistic and shit, and then it ends with them them roughhousing and then getting the flowers and shit right before they start serenading all the women,
Hmm.
and it's like, oh, get it, because it's there's no better tomorrow. It's just
I mean, not a
it's
bad
all
idea for
broken hopes and dreams. No, I think it works.
thing. Yeah.
Yeah. I do think it works. I'm not gonna say it's like better or anything like that, but interesting experiment, and I think speaks a lot to his sensibilities as a filmmaker, like what he cuts and what he like streamlines
Mhm.
from the narrative. I do ultimately love this movie. I think I came in a little soft
Uh-huh.
on it, but even just talking about it has been
Yeah.
like really helpful in me appreciating it
It's
more.
an interesting one. I go with weird ups and downs on it where like I'll revisit it from time to time. And sometimes I'll watch and be like, this is a little like it's a little too indulgent. It's a little too much. But then sometimes
Mm-mm.
I'll watch and be like really into it. I don't know what shifts between each version, each revisit. I mean, I think maybe this time it's just the current climate we're living under. Um, has
Mm-hmm.
certainly influenced how I watch the movie. But
Yeah. Where I'm like, indulgence, thank God.
well, yeah. There's, I'm also someone said this quote. I can't remember who said this, but it's one of those quotes that changed how I watched movies. Where this person was saying like I was talking to a friend about Apocalypse Now, and this friend said, I don't want to see one man's ego trip. And my response was, there's nothing else I'd rather see. Like, you want to see someone just put it all out there, right? Like, you kind of want to
Mm-hmm.
see that. And I was kind of like, yeah, you're right. Like, why am I complaining about that? Like, don't you want to see someone just go crazy? Like, even if they're an idiot, like, don't you want to see
Yeah.
someone go nuts? It doesn't mean you have to like the movie, but I would like to see it. So.
Yeah, and again, it's the cinema versus plot thing. Plot is an extension of how we describe like the narratives of cinema, but it is not the only thing. God knows it isn't the most important thing. Um, but when I'm watching a movie, I do want to feel stuff. I don't care if it's a little illogical or um,
Yeah.
indulgent. I guess. Now maybe that could change. This next decade of cinema could become rapidly overindulgent. Uh,
But
and
here's
I'll
the thing.
have a different response to that. But
That is the
you
complaint
know,
about Heaven's Gate is like one of them is that it's overindulgent, right? And what
hmm
so like what are the let's just go through the other movies that are like the other like new Hollywood bombs, right? Which I think you could describe all of them as overindulgent, correct? So it's like
yes,
Sorcerer, 1941, New York, New York, Heaven's Gate, One from the Heart. I think those are like the big ones, right? I'm sure there
hmm
are. Am I missing any?
those are the main ones.
Now, I think you could describe all of those as overindulgent or self-indulgent. But how many of them do we actually like revisiting? How many of them are actually good when
hmm
you watch them?
Well, I like
Yeah,
those.
exactly. The only
Yeah.
one I'd kind of brush up against is 1941. Like, and even that one has like great
hmm
moments in it. Like,
Yeah. I told you, you got to do the Belushi cut. You just get the Belushi scenes,
fucking Soderbergh,
and then it's a
Soderbergh,
masterpiece.
get on that. Like, you don't be
Yeah.
doing these like good movies. If I could take something like 1941 and just do the funny stuff that actually works.
By the way, Billy Jarrett, you fucker. I know you're
What do
listening
you
to
do? What do you
this.
do?
What do you mean 1941 is your favorite Spielberg movie? Like, look, I like that movie. I'm a defender. What the fuck is wrong with you?
Billy, what
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 is
was
that?
happening? Billy, Billy, what
Billy.
was happening? Something was happening while you were watching 1941. Like, I'm not like I'm one of the like more like, it's fine. Like, I don't hate that movie, right? Like,
Mhm.
but Billy, like you got you something else was happening when you watched that movie that is the reason why you responded so positively.
I'm gonna say there's two possible outcomes to that. All right. One, he saw it when he was a kid and he's very nostalgic for it, and that's totally fine. Two, he was an adult and getting a blowjob
I
and
was gonna
watching
make
it,
that
and
exact
that's.
joke. I was gearing up for that exact joke before you did it. Uh,
I'm sorry.
but I was trying to think of a different way to phrase it. I was like, I don't want to do it like
No.
that. But no, I was gonna say it was either he was either really nostalgic or he enjoyed the company he was with while he watched the movie.
Oh, that's a much
Yeah,
better way of putting that. I'm
yeah.
sorry. I try not to be too crass in this
But because
podcast.
that, no offense, my man, but come on now, 555. Come on now.
Thank you for listening.
Yeah, thanks for being a regular listener to the show. I know who you are. But,
Oh.
because no, that's a big no. It's just,
um,
um,
yeah. But there's do we want to say the other thing that we could say about that era,
um,
the new
no,
Hollywood
no,
bombs,
no,
or do we
no.
want to
We'll
save that?
save that. We'll save some.
Okay,
But
that'll be a fun
yeah, yeah,
surprise.
they'll put it together though.
Maybe.
Yeah. So, but it's that thing of like 1941's the only one I really brush up against. And so maybe just overindulgent is a criticism we just shouldn't give movies,
hmm
right? Like, and if we're going to talk about the cost of a movie, and we're going to talk about that, it should not be in discussion of the quality of the film itself. We should be discussing the labor issue around it, right? And I extend that to we all get a lot of fun dunking on how does this movie cost $200 million, right? Like, and we show a clip from like The
hmm
Flash, and it looks like dog shit, right? I get it. Like, I'm not gonna totally come down on that. We all do it, but we should also consider the labor considerations of what's going on there. That's the real story. It's
hmm
not the actual quality of the film. Uh,
Yeah.
but hey, uh, Heaven's Gate, not
Heaven's
not the
Gate.
Suicide Cult.
No. Oh, by the way, yeah, careful when you do Google searches or YouTube searches on this movie because it's still not that popular outside of film nerd circles. You're gonna get some recommendations for other stuff, and if you accidentally click on a video like perhaps I did, those will stick around in your
Yeah, they're
recommendations for
gonna
a bit.
think you're into the
So
Suicide Cult. Thank
I
you,
know this is fucking.
algorithms.
I wasn't trying to build a bomb. I was just curious. That's a joke from New Girl.
Oh boy, you keep selling New Girl, man. Keep trying. I'll
It's
get to
great.
it. I'll
It's
get to
great.
it.
Yeah. Oh, this is for everyone else now.
Yeah.
Go watch New Girl and Heaven's Gate.
Too many of our listeners get the New Girl first before I do.
I know. Dan, if you haven't seen New Girl yet,
Dan
I think you'd like it.
Doherty's going through some shit though, so I don't know if you want to recommend something like New Girl.
Oh, it's perfect for going through
Dan
it.
Doherty's been tweeting like he's a divorced dad in his 40s.
He's getting it out of the way so he could enter his Agnes Varda
Yeah,
era.
maybe. Yeah.
That's what's happening. He's gonna bloom like, or what do the butterflies do? They're gonna cocoon and then what do they do when they leave the cocoon? What's it called?
What do the butterflies do? There's the title of our next film. What do the butterflies do? Accidental poetry at the end of the Heaven's Gate episode. What do the butterflies do?
Do androids dream of electric sheep? What do the butterflies do?
Like you just walked up to me and we're like, Matt, what do the butterflies do? Oh my god. Oh dear God. The immortal question. What do the butterflies do?
Fuck.
Dan Doherty, you're doing fine. You'll be all right. Everything's fine. You're fine. You got your shit together better than I did at your age. Just don't start a podcast. Does he have a podcast that I've been ignoring?
No.
Don't start a podcast.
No.
Do not start a podcast.
Yeah, don't.
It's a prison of your own making. Don't.
It kind of is. Don't do it. I've never been happier to be in prison. I
started doing this podcast because I couldn't walk for a year. Don't you?
And now
don't you dare do it. Don't you do it.
Look at us
now. We took us fucking... How long have we been doing this? I feel like we've only recently gotten good at it.
You know, the first couple years might have been a little rough. I would like to re-record some stuff.
We find an excuse.
Yeah, I mean, hey, the last good YouTube channel, Dead Meat, they go back and do, like, revisit their old, like, kill count videos, and then they reapproach stuff with, like, a new angle or lens, and sometimes they don't like the movies they covered that they previously enjoyed, and sometimes they're like, actually, I see, like, a more positive angle on this now, or whatever, or, like, you want to give more consideration to the people that made it.
More people should do that, especially in the YouTube communities.
Yeah, I really like that channel a lot.
I'll be honest. I think this failed awards, failed blockbuster thing is the thing we accidentally hit on as being the good series we do. Like I think retrospectives were kind of all over the place, and there'd be weird ups and downs, and we kind of just did whatever. And I think this has been the thing that like I enjoyed doing the most of our series. It's something we originally started with. We were just going to do 3 movies right in a row, just because we were like, why don't we talk about this? And then it's So
yeah, I think we like Dan the Butterfly have broken free of the cocoon and are now talking about basically not just stuff we like always want to talk about, but I think it's been very beneficial for both of us to like just kind of get some bearings and ground
doing
ourselves.
A retrospective, we aren't tied to a franchise or a director where we have to talk about a film of theirs that maybe we have nothing to say about.
Yeah. Halloween 6.
Yeah, looking at you, buddy. I watched both versions of that goddamn movie.
Yeah, and it's like, some people like that other version.
People are insane.
They're
crazy. They're both not good is the thing. I guess the other cut's better.
It's just funny that it was released in theaters. That's the end of my enjoyment of that.
It's funny that they used magic rocks to stop him. That's what everyone was missing. Especially when the last movie ends with him just getting hit over the head with a bit of wood. Bringing it all back.
Yeah. You know, there's a slight Rodriguez connection to the Halloween franchise.
Oh, yeah?
Unfortunately, because of the Weinstein, but Miramax. And Robert Rodriguez is the director of our next film that we're going to cover.
Oh, you already picked? Right.
Yeah. We're doing a Little Battle Angel.
Say that again.
We did a Little Battle Angel.
Sounded like you said, we're doing a Little Battle Angel. I was like, that's a choice. The littlest battle angel, Alita.
That's the title in Canada,
Wow.
actually. The Littlest Battle Angel.
What's that show called? The Littlest Hobo? Isn't that the show? You
What?
didn't know that? I thought you were referencing that.
No, what is
There's
that?
a Canadian show called Littlest Hobo. It's a show about like a dog. Like it's a dog that like lives on the streets, and like
What?
the dog gets in new adventures every week. It's like one of the most popular.
That sounds
It does, but it's one of the
depressing.
most popular shows in Canadian history.
The fuck happened in Canada? What is wrong
Extremely
with you people?
intelligent stray German Shepherd, the titular hobo who wanders from town to town, helping people in need. So, the Littlest Hobo. That has nothing to do with Alita Battle Angel.
No,
Looking forward to that
no.
one.
But
Alita
yeah, me
Army's finally
too.
gonna find us.
No, they found us already. They want to make sure we're on the right side of
Yeah, they all.
history, and
Well, here's
thankfully
the, I
we
will say is
are. I
they
think.
all messaged. I'll bring it up again during the Elite episode. They all were like very supportive of our thing, so I was happy to see that. But there was one guy who just didn't seem to get it and thought we were shit talking the
Yeah.
movie.
Yep.
Yeah, so
Yep.
hey, I'll get to throw down my OG Alita fan cred though, so I get to.
Yes. Yes. Because I don't know anything about those
We're gonna have some fun. Um,
comics.
you should read them though.
Yeah.
They're honestly like the original series. It's only 9 volumes. It's totally worth it. Like, so just
Okay.
make sure it's the original. Don't do like there's the reboot that's like Alita Last Order or something. Don't do that. But um, yeah. So
All
it's
right.
yes, we will do Battle Angel next week. You know what? I don't
Yeah,
think I've
Matt.
watched
Thank
it
you for
since I
joining
bought it
me.
on Blu-ray, so I'm looking forward to watching it again. I like that movie so much.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. I'm also excited. Matt, thank you for joining me. Uh, where can people find you, if anywhere?
Well, as of the time of this recording, Elon's trying to get rid of the block feature on Twitter, apparently. And even though everyone in the world is telling him he's wrong, including James Woods, he's currently in a feud with James Woods. I will say, if that goes away, I'm 100% done with Twitter. Like, I just will not, like, I will not tolerate that stupidity. I am on Blue
Yeah.
Sky. I'm on Tumblr. I'm on Instagram at Emperor OTN, pretty much everywhere. I keep saying it, but I am gearing up to stream again. It will happen soon. It's just life gets complicated, so those are the things to keep an eye
Yeah.
out for.
If I start streaming before you, I feel like I should get a
Well,
prize.
go ahead. I got your
Okay. I don't
GameCube
know what
now,
that should be.
motherfucker. I've taken
Yeah.
your power.
That's right. I bought the PS5, but it's a Spider-Man one that they're
Yeah,
coming out with because of course I would. So that'll get here eventually, and I'll probably stream the Spider-Man 2 when that comes out. Yay!
yay.
Yeah, links down to everywhere else you can find us down below on the description. Thanks for listening, everyone. Thanks for watching. Like and subscribe if you didn't like this. Like and subscribe anyways because you might find something you do like Alita Battle
Yeah.
Angel. All right, goodbye. We've been professionally unprofessional.